My flight to Denver was canceled, so I rushed home to surprise my son. Instead, I froze in my own hallway when I caught him and my daughter-in-law trying to pry open my reinforced basement door with a crowbar. "What the hell are you doing?" I roared, my voice shaking the walls of the house I built with my own hands. Darnell jumped back, dropping the metal bar with a loud clang, his face turning the color of ash. "Dad," he stammered, his eyes wide with terror. "I thought you were out of town until Tuesday." Becky didn't even flinch. She just stood there holding a high-powered drill, looking at me with cold blue eyes that held zero respect. Then I looked past them out the open back door and saw a massive, unmarked moving truck parked in my driveway under the cover of darkness. That is when I realized this was not a visit. This was a robbery. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial. "I am calling the police," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against family who mistook your kindness for weakness. Let me back up to how this nightmare started 3 hours earlier. It was 2 in the morning on a freezing Chicago Tuesday, the kind of cold that settles in your bones and reminds you of every old injury. I was standing at the curb of O'Hare Airport staring at a canceled flight notification on my phone. My leg was throbbing. I walk with a cane, now the result of a construction accident 30 years ago, but do not let the limp fool you. I am Cyrus Blackwood, 72 years old, and while the world sees a retired old man in a worn-out coat inside, I am still the structural engineer who designed the security vaults for 3 of the biggest banks on the East Coast. I decided not to call Darnell my son. He had practically begged to house sit while I was gone, claiming he wanted to check on the furnace and water my plants. I thought it would be a nice surprise to come home early, maybe share a late-night coffee. I took a cab back to the suburbs. The streets were empty and silent. When the taxi pulled up to my house, I did not see Darnell's car in the driveway, but I saw something else that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A large box truck was backed up right to my garage door engine, idling lights off. It had no company logo, just rust and mud on the license plate. My instincts, honed from decades of protecting assets, kicked in immediately. I told the cab driver to drop me a block away. "Keep the change," I told him, handing him a $50 bill. I approached my own house like an intruder moving through the neighbor's hedge, avoiding the motion sensor lights I had installed myself. I knew the blind spots because I created them. The back door was unlocked, not forced open, but unlocked with a key. I stepped into the mudroom, the smell of drywall dust and stale sweat hitting me instantly. The house was supposed to be empty and quiet, but instead I heard a sound that made my blood boil. It was the high-pitched whine of a diamond-tipped drill bit grinding against hardened steel coming from the basement. I crept through the kitchen, my hand gripping the heavy handle of my cane. I looked into the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. It was gone. My living room was gone. The vintage leather recliner where my wife Lucille used to read for hours gone. The mahogany coffee table we bought in New Orleans 40 years ago gone. The 65-inch television gone. The walls were bare, the rectangular pale spots where my art collection used to hang screaming at me in the dim light. They were not just stealing a few things, they were gutting my life. The noise from the basement grew louder, followed by the sound of metal striking metal. I moved to the top of the basement stairs. Light flooded up from below, casting long, distorted shadows against the wall. I walked down the wooden steps, my bad leg protesting with every movement, but I made no sound. I saw them before they saw me. Darnell was sweating through his expensive shirt, swinging a heavy crowbar against the doorframe of my private study. Becky was standing next to him, directing a flashlight at the hinges, holding a commercial-grade drill. They were trying to break into the one room in the house I always kept locked. The room Darnell called the mystery cave. He thought it was just where I kept old tax papers and junk, but Becky, she was smarter and greedier. She suspected there was something valuable behind that steel-reinforced door, and she was right, just not in the way she thought.
"Come on, put your back into it,
Darnell." Becky hissed, her voice echoing in the concrete space. "We have to get this open before the truck leaves. If the safe is in there, I want it loaded first." My heart broke in that moment, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of disappointment. I looked at my son, a man of 35, who I had put through private school, who I had bailed out of bad investments, twice a man, who still looked for shortcuts instead of doing the work. And here he was, sweating and grunting, trying to rob his own father like a common thief. "What the hell are you doing?" The roar tore out of my throat before I could stop it. The crash of the crowbar hitting the concrete floor was the only sound for 10 seconds. Darnell spun around, terror written all over his face, his hands shaking so bad he could barely stand. "Dad," he gasped, backing up until he hit the wall. You are in Denver." Becky was the first to recover, and her reaction chilled me to the bone. She did not drop the drill, she did not apologize, she did not look ashamed. She simply turned off the drill, set it down on a workbench, and smoothed out her designer jeans. She looked at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I were a delivery driver who had arrived at an inconvenient time. "You are back early, Si," she said, her voice flat. "We were just doing some cleaning." "Cleaning," I repeated, walking down the last few steps, my cane tapping a rhythmic warning on the concrete. "You call prying a steel door off its hinges cleaning. You call stripping my living room bare cleaning." Darnell stepped forward, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "No, Dad, wait. It is not what it looks like. Becky and we wanted to surprise you. We are going to remodel the house, update it a bit. We wanted to have the living room painted before you got back." I looked at him. The lie was so clumsy, so childish, it was insulting. "Remodel," I said, stepping closer until I could smell the fear on him. "With a moving truck at 2 a.m. By breaking into a room I specifically told you never to enter." Becky stepped in between us, placing a protective hand on Darnell's chest. "Stop shouting at him," she snapped, her tone sharp. "You are confusing him. We are doing this for the family, Si. We are pregnant." The words hung in the damp basement air. Darnell looked at her, surprised for a split second before nodding vigorously. "Yes, that is right, Dad. Becky is pregnant. We need to turn this basement into a suite for us and the baby. We were just clearing out your old junk to make space." I looked at Becky's flat stomach and then at her cold, calculating eyes. I remembered the receipt I had seen in her trash can last week from a cosmetic surgery clinic for a tummy tuck consultation. I knew she was lying. She was using an unborn child that did not exist as a shield to deflect my anger. "You are lying," I said, my voice steady. "There is no baby, and even if there were, you do not clear out a room by breaking the lock with a drill." I pointed my cane at the door they had been attacking. "You think I do not know what you are looking for? You think I am just a senile old man sitting on a pile of cash, don't you?" Becky's mask slipped for just a second, revealing a sneer of pure contempt. "Well, you are hoarding this house," she spat. "It is too big for one person. Darnell needs capital for his business. We were going to sell the junk you do not use and put the money to good use." "Junk." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That junk in the living room included your mother's piano." "Darnell, did you sell her piano?" Darnell looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "We got a good price for it, Dad," he mumbled. "A guy in the truck paid cash." Cash. They had sold my deceased wife's Steinway piano, likely worth $40,000, to a fence in a shady truck, probably for a few $100, just to get quick money. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I had felt since Vietnam. It was not hot and fiery, it was cold and hard like the steel beams I used to inspect. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "Get out," I said. "Dad, please." Darnell pleaded, tears forming in his eyes. "Get out of my house before I call the cops and have you both dragged out in handcuffs." Becky laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Call them," she challenged, crossing her arms. "Go ahead, Si, call the police. Tell them your son is cleaning your house. Tell them you are confused again. See who they believe." I looked at her and I realized she was not afraid because she had a plan. She had been planting seeds for months, telling neighbors I was forgetting things, telling the church group I was getting fragile. She was banking on my age being my weakness. She thought she could gaslight me in my own home. I looked at the screen of my phone. I dialed 911. "This is Cyrus Blackwood at 4200 Oak Street," I said into the receiver, my eyes locked on Darnell. "I have intruders in my home. They are armed with tools, and they are stripping the property. Send officers immediately." Darnell panicked, lunging forward to grab the phone, but I swung my cane, cracking him sharply across the shins. He howled and fell back, clutching his leg. "Don't you touch me, boy," I warned. "I might be old, but I will break you before the police get here." Becky's face went pale for the first time. "You are crazy," she hissed. "He is your son." "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight he is just a thief." I backed up the stairs, keeping my eyes on them until I reached the kitchen. I locked the basement door from the top, sliding the heavy deadbolt I had installed years ago. I heard them pounding on the door from below, screaming, but I didn't listen. I walked to the front window and looked out. The driver of the moving truck must have sensed trouble because the engine roared and the truck peeled away tires, screeching, leaving the back gate open. Half of my furniture was in that truck, speeding away into the night. The sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. I stood in the center of my empty living room, the rectangular ghosts of my pictures staring back at me. I felt a heavy weight in my chest, but I did not collapse. I straightened my back. They thought they were robbing a helpless old pensioner. They thought they could pick my bones clean while I was still breathing. But they made a fatal mistake. They forgot that before I was a retiree, before I was a father, I was the man who built the vaults that keep the devil out. And if they wanted a war, they had just broken into the wrong fortress. The blue lights flashed against the living room walls. I walked to the front door to let the officers in. This was just the beginning. If Darnell and Becky thought a locked basement door was a problem, they had no idea what traps I had waiting for them in the daylight. I opened the door and prepared to give the performance of a lifetime, not for them, but for the law. Because in this game, the one who looks the most vulnerable is the one who holds all the cards. The red and blue lights of the police cruiser swept across my living room walls like a disco strobe in a nightmare. I stood by the open front door, my cane gripped so tight my knuckles turned the color of old parchment. I thought this was the moment of justice. I thought I was about to watch my son and his scheming wife get dragged out of my house in handcuffs. I was wrong. 2 officers walked up the driveway, their hands resting on their belts. One was young, maybe 25, with a face that looked like he was barely out of the academy. The other was older, tired-looking, with a mustache that had seen too many domestic disputes. "Officer Miller," his badge said. I stepped back to let them in, pointing a shaking finger at Darnell and Becky, who were still standing by the basement door. "Officers," I said, my voice steady, despite the rage burning a hole in my chest. "I want to report a burglary in progress. These 2 broke into my home, destroyed my property, and attempted to access a secure vault in my basement. I want them arrested immediately." The older officer looked at the crowbar on the floor, then at the drill on the workbench, then at the empty living room. He looked at me, his eyes assessing. "Sir, do you know these people?" he asked. "Of course I know them," I snapped. "That is my son Darnell, and that is his wife Becky. But being related does not give them the right to gut my house like a fish while I am supposed to be in Denver." Darnell stepped forward and the transformation was instant. The terrified thief I had cornered 2 minutes ago vanished. In his place was a weeping, concerned son, his shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "Officers, thank God you are here," Darnell said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. "We have been so worried. My father, he is having another episode." I stared at him, my mouth falling open. Episode 1 repeated. "What are you talking about, boy?" Becky moved to Darnell's side, placing a hand on his arm, playing the supportive spouse perfectly. She looked at the officers with wide, innocent eyes. "He gets confused," she said, lowering her voice as if she didn't want me to hear. "It has been getting worse lately. Dementia, the doctors think. He forgets where he is. He forgets that he asked us to come over. He gets violent." She gestured to the crowbar on the floor. "We had to use that to pry open the basement door because he locked himself down there earlier and we were afraid he had hurt himself. We were just trying to help him." The lie was so bold, so detailed that for a second I was speechless. They were flipping the script on me. Officer Miller turned back to me, his hand moving away from his taser but his stance still guarded. "Is this true, sir? Did you ask them to come over?" "No," I roared, stepping forward. "I did not ask them to do anything. I was at the airport. My flight was canceled. I came home and found a moving truck in my driveway. Look outside, the truck is gone because the driver panicked when I called you. Half my furniture is missing." Darnell shook his head, tears actually streaming down his face now. "Dad, there was no truck. You sold the furniture last week, remember? You said the government was putting cameras in the sofa. You made us take it away." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This wasn't just a lie on the fly. This was a script. They had rehearsed this. "Officer," I said, trying to keep my voice calm because I knew that yelling would only make me look unstable. "I am a retired structural engineer. I am perfectly lucid. My son is a liar and a thief who is trying to cover up a felony. Check the basement door. Look at the drill marks. That is a high-security lock. You do not use a diamond tip drill to check on a sick old man." Officer Miller looked at the basement door, then back at Darnell. He seemed hesitant. Darnell saw the hesitation and played his ace card. "Officers." "I have the paperwork right here," Darnell said, reaching into his jacket pocket. My hand instinctively went to my cane, ready to strike if he pulled a weapon, but he pulled out a folded document. "Because of his condition, my father signed over power of attorney to me last month." He handed the paper to the officer. "I am his legal guardian. I manage his assets and his medical care. We are just trying to renovate the basement to make it safe for him to live down there so we can move in upstairs and monitor him 24/7. Give me that, I demanded, snatching the paper from Officer Miller's hand before he could stop me. My eyes scanned the document. It was a durable power of attorney granting Darnell Blackwood full control over the finances and medical decisions of Cyrus Blackwood due to incapacitation. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It had a notary stamp, and at the bottom it had my signature. I stared at the signature, and the world stopped spinning. It was my handwriting. The loop of the C, the sharp angle of the B. It was perfect. But I knew I had never signed this. I had never even seen this document before. Then I looked closer and I saw it. The slight tremor in the tail of the letter D. I remembered exactly when I had written that specific signature. It was not on a legal document. It was on a birthday card I had given Darnell last year. I had written, "I am proud of the man you are becoming, love, Dad." And I had signed it while sitting in my car with the engine running, the vibration causing that tiny tremor in the D. He had scanned my signature from a birthday card. He had lifted the ink from a message of love and pasted it onto a document designed to enslave me. The betrayal hit me harder than the financial loss. I had been proud of him that day. I had given him a check for $5,000 inside that card to help with his business, and he had used that very act of kindness to forge the chains he was now trying to wrap around my wrists. "This is a forgery," I said, my voice deadly quiet. I looked at Officer Miller. "Look at this signature. It is a copy. I never signed this. This man is committing fraud right in front of you." Becky stepped in, her voice sharp and authoritative. "He always says that when he is confused, officer. Last week he claimed the mailman was a CIA agent forging his bills. Look, we don't want to press charges for him hitting Darnell. We just want you to leave so we can get him his medication and get him to bed." Officer Miller looked at his partner, then at the paperwork, then at me. He let out a long sigh, the sound of a man who just wanted his shift to end. "Mr. Blackwood," the officer said, addressing me, "this document looks legal. It has a notary seal. If you are saying it is forged, that is a civil matter for the courts, not something we can decide in a living room at 3 a.m. "But they are robbing me," I insisted, pointing at the empty spots on the floor. "Sir, your son has power of attorney," the officer said firmly. "Legally, he can move furniture if he sees fit. As far as I can see, there is no intruder here. This is a family dispute. We can take you to the hospital for an evaluation if you feel unsafe, or we can leave you in the care of your son. Those were my choices. Go to a psych ward, which would only strengthen their claim that I was crazy, or stay in my own house as a prisoner." I looked at Darnell. He had stopped crying. He was watching me with a look of triumph that made me want to vomit. I looked at Becky. She was smirking, her arms crossed over her chest, the drill still sitting on the workbench behind her like a trophy. They had won this round. If I fought the police now, I would end up in cuffs. If I went to the hospital, they would control the narrative. I had to stay. I had to protect what was left in the basement. "I am fine," I said, forcing the words through my teeth. "I do not need a hospital. I will stay here." Officer Miller nodded, handing the forged document back to Darnell. "Okay then. Keep it down, folks. If we have to come back out here tonight, someone is going for a ride." The officers turned and walked out the front door. I watched them go, feeling the hope drain out of the room with them. The heavy oak door clicked shut and the lock turned. We were alone again. The silence that filled the empty living room was heavy and suffocating. Darnell pocketed the fake power of attorney, patting his chest like he had just won a gold medal. Becky walked over to me. She didn't look like a daughter-in-law anymore. She looked like a warden. "You should have stayed in Denver." "Sigh," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "You are making this harder than it needs to be." "You forged my signature," I said, looking at Darnell, "from your birthday card." Darnell had the decency to look away, but Becky laughed. "It is called creative asset management," she said, "and it is legal until a judge says otherwise, which will take months. By then we will have sold this place and put you somewhere safe, somewhere you cannot hurt anyone." She emphasized the word safe with a sneer. Darnell walked over to the basement door and picked up the crowbar. "Go to bed, Dad," he said, his voice tired but firm. "We are sleeping in the master bedroom tonight. You can take the guest room. And do not try to leave. I changed the codes on the alarm system while you were arguing with the cops. If you open a door, the police come back. And next time we will tell them you threatened us with a knife." I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike. The man I had bailed out of debt. He was threatening to frame me to put me in a cage. I realized then that the son I loved was gone. Maybe he never existed. Maybe he was just a reflection of my own hopes, and now the mirror was broken. I gripped my cane. I did not say a word. I turned my back on them and walked down the hallway to the guest room. My leg was burning, my heart was breaking, but my mind was already racing. They thought they had trapped me. They thought because they had a piece of paper and a new alarm code they were in control. They forgot one thing. I built this house. I knew every wire, every vent, every hollow space behind the drywall. They had taken my living room. They had taken my legal standing, but they had made a mistake leaving me inside the fortress I designed. I went into the guest room and closed the door. I heard them laughing in the kitchen, opening a bottle of my expensive wine to celebrate their victory. I sat on the edge of the small bed and stared at the wall. Becky was right about one thing. I was old, but she was wrong about the rest. I wasn't confused. I was focused. I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out a small burner phone I kept for emergencies. The police wouldn't help me. The law was too slow. I needed a different kind of help. I needed the kind of help that didn't care about notary stamps or civil disputes. I needed to call the only person in Chicago who hated Darnell almost as much as I did right now. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered gravelly and sharp. "Hello." I took a deep breath. "Marcus," I said. "It is Cy. I need you to open a file. Project Omega is active. My son just declared war." I hung up and lay back on the bed listening to the intruders in my kitchen. Let them drink. Let them celebrate. Tomorrow morning, when they tried to use that fake power of attorney at the bank, they were going to find out that the old man had teeth, and I was going to bite hard. The sun was barely up when I slipped out the back door, my joints stiff from the lumpy mattress in the guest room. Inside the kitchen, I could hear the clatter of pans and the smell of expensive bacon cooking. Becky was making breakfast in my house using my stove, probably feeding my son while they planned how to spend the money they thought they had already won. I did not go in there to scream at them. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. Instead, I put on my old canvas jacket, pulled my cap low over my eyes, and walked out into the gray Chicago morning. I had a mission. A soldier without ammunition is just a target, and right now I was walking into a war zone with empty pockets. I needed cash. Liquid assets. The kind of power that does not require a PIN code or a permission slip. I walked 4 blocks to the First National Bank branch on 5th Street. This was not just any bank. I had been banking here for 40 years. I knew the manager Stan before he retired. I knew the layout of the vault because I had consulted on its reinforcement in '92. I walked up to the ATM in the vestibule, my hand reaching for my wallet. I needed $5,000, enough to hire a lawyer who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty and maybe a locksmith who didn't ask questions. I slid my debit card into the slot. The machine whirred. The screen glowed blue. I punched in my PIN. The code I had used since 1985. Processing, the screen flashed. I waited, watching the street behind me, my paranoia itching under my skin. Then the machine made a heavy mechanical clunk. A message popped up in red letters that seemed to scream at me. Card retained. Contact issuer immediately. I stared at the screen, my breath fogging the glass. Retained. Stolen. The machine had just eaten my lifeline. I pressed cancel. I hit the return button. Nothing. Just the cold indifference of technology. My heart started to hammer against my ribs, a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. I turned and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the lobby. It was quiet, just the hum of the air conditioning and the soft typing of tellers. I walked straight to the counter. The teller was a young woman I didn't recognize. She looked up, her smile professional and empty. "Can I help you, sir?" "My machine just ate my card," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "My name is Cyrus Blackwood. I need to make a withdrawal." She typed my name into her computer. The smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of confusion, then alarm. "One moment, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her hand moving to a button under the counter. "Please wait here." She hurried away toward the glass-walled office at the back. I stood there, feeling the eyes of the security guard on my back. I felt small. I felt old. I felt exactly how Darnell wanted me to feel. A minute later, the branch manager walked out. His name was Peterson. He was a man in his 30s with a suit that was too shiny and a handshake that was too soft. I had never liked him. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice pitched a little too loud, like he was talking to a child or someone hard of hearing. "Why don't we step into my office? "I do not want to step into your office," I snapped. "I want my money. Your machine took my card." "Please, Mr. Blackwood," Peterson said, ushering me through the gate. "People are staring." I let him lead me into the office. He closed the door and blinds, offering me a seat. I remained standing, leaning on my cane, my eyes locked on his. "What is going on, Peterson?" He sat down behind his desk and folded his hands on top of a file. He looked uncomfortable, but there was a smugness there too, the power of a bureaucrat holding the keys. "Mr. Blackwood, I am afraid I have some bad news," he began. "We received a court order this morning." "A court order," I repeated the words, tasting like copper in my mouth. "From who?" "It is a temporary emergency guardianship order," Peterson explained. "Filed by your son Darnell Blackwood. Based on the documentation provided regarding your declining mental health, we have been instructed to freeze all assets pending a competency hearing." I laughed a short bark of disbelief. "Declining mental health. I designed the load-bearing structure of this building, Peterson. I can do complex calculus in my head. Do I look incompetent to you?" Peterson sighed, giving me a look of practiced pity that made me want to reach across the desk and strangle him. "Mr. Blackwood, your son provided a notarized affidavit stating that you have been exhibiting signs of severe dementia. He says you have been giving away large sums of money to strangers, forgetting who family members are, and becoming aggressive." "Aggressive," I said, my voice rising. "I became aggressive because he was robbing my house at 2 a.m. Peterson held up a hand. "See, this is what he warned us about. Paranoia, accusations of theft against loved ones. It is a classic symptom." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Look, Cyrus, I know this is hard, but Darnell is just trying to protect you. He showed us the power of attorney. It was notarized by Paul Giamatti." I froze. Paul Giamatti. I knew that name. He wasn't a respectable notary. He was a gambling buddy of Darnell S., a man who ran a shady check-cashing joint on the South Side. A man who would stamp a confession to murder if you slid him $100. "That notary is a crook," I said, my voice cold. "And that signature on the power of attorney was forged, copied from a birthday card." Peterson shook his head slowly, looking at me like I was a tragic case. "We have to follow the protocol, Mr. Blackwood. The document looks valid. Until a judge says otherwise, Darnell is in charge of your accounts. I cannot give you any cash. It is for your own protection, for my protection. They were stripping me naked, leaving me defenseless in a world that costs money to survive, and they called it protection." I realized then that arguing with Peterson was useless. He wasn't evil. He was just a cog in the machine. He saw an old man with a cane and a young man with a suit and a piece of paper, and he made the easy choice. Darnell and Becky had played this perfectly. They used the system's own bias against me. They weaponized my age. To the world, I was just a confused senior citizen who needed to be managed. I looked at the computer screen on Peterson's desk where my life savings were reduced to a series of numbers I could no longer touch. "So I have nothing," I said. "Zero." Peterson nodded. "Your son has authorized a stipend to be released to him for your care. He says he is moving in to look after you full time. You should go home, Mr. Blackwood. Let Darnell take care of you." I stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "You have made a mistake, Peterson," I said quietly. "A structural error. You bet on the wrong foundation." I turned around and walked out of the office. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I walked through the lobby, past the staring teller, past the security guard, and out into the bright sunlight. My hands were shaking, but not from age. From pure, unadulterated fury. I stood on the sidewalk, people rushing past me, oblivious to the fact that I had just been erased. I checked my pockets. I had $42 in cash, a pack of gum, and my keys. That was it. Darnell had the house. He had the bank accounts. He had the law on his side. He probably thought he had won. He probably thought I would come crawling back to the guest room begging for a hot meal, accepting my fate as a prisoner in my own home. But Darnell forgot who raised him. And more importantly, he forgot who I was married to. Lucille. My beautiful, brilliant Lucille. She had passed 5 years ago, but in that moment I felt her presence beside me, strong and fierce. I remembered a night 10 years ago, sitting at our kitchen table. We had just found out Darnell had blown his college fund on a pyramid scheme. Lucille had taken my hand, her eyes sad but hard. "Sigh," she had said. That boy has a hole in him where his conscience should be. He loves easy money more than he loves us. One day he is going to come for everything. I hadn't wanted to believe her then. I told her she was being too hard on him, but Lucille was an accountant. She understood risk, and she insisted we build a back door, a fail-safe. We called it Protocol Omega. It was a contingency plan designed for the worst-case scenario, the scenario where we lost control of our own assets. I hadn't thought about it in years. I hoped I would never have to use it. It felt like a betrayal just to set it up like we were betting against our own flesh and blood. But standing there on the pavement with $42 to my name and my son turning my home into a prison, I realized Lucille was right. She was always right. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, blocking out the traffic noise. I visualized the blueprints of my life. I located the hidden lines the secret supports. I opened my eyes. I was not going back to the house. Not yet. I turned left, walking away from the bus stop that would take me home. I started walking toward the older part of town, the industrial district where the buildings were brick and the shadows were long. Darnell thought he had frozen my assets. He thought he had cut off my supply lines. But he didn't know about the shadow ledger. He didn't know that for the last 15 years, every time I did a consulting job for the city or a private audit for a bank, I took 10% of the fee in cash or gold. And I didn't put it in First National Bank. I didn't put it anywhere a court order could reach. I put it in the one place Darnell would never look, because it involved hard work and dirty hands. I walked faster, my cane clicking a steady rhythm on the concrete. Pain is just information, I told myself. My leg was telling me to stop, but my mind was telling me to run, not away from the fight, but toward the armory. Darnell wanted to play the role of the caring son guarding the senile father. Fine. I would let him play that role for a few more hours. I would let him get comfortable. I would let him think the old lion had lost his teeth. Because when I came back, I wouldn't be coming back as his father. I would be coming back as the architect of his destruction. Protocol Omega was active, and the first step was to disappear. I returned to the house not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. Walking the streets with $42 was a death sentence for a man my age with a bad leg, so I played my part. I walked back up the driveway, my head hung low, acting every bit the defeated old man they wanted me to be. Darnell opened the door with a smug look of pity that made my stomach turn. "I told you Mom would come back," he said to Becky loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "He gets confused, but he knows where home is." They ushered me inside, and that is when the true occupation began. For the next 3 days, I lived as a prisoner in the house I had built with my own sweat and blood. They took the master bedroom, the room where I had held Lucille as she took her last breath. They moved my things out in garbage bags, tossing them into the hallway like trash. Because they had sold the living room furniture to that fence in the truck, I was forced to sleep on a cheap inflatable air mattress they threw onto the hardwood floor of the dining room. I lay there at night listening to them moving around upstairs, walking on my ceiling, claiming my sanctuary. It was a slow, suffocating violation. They took my keys. They took my phone, claiming I was making prank calls to the police. They controlled the food, putting me on a diet of oatmeal and bland soup, saying it was for my digestion, but I knew it was just cheap. But the worst part was watching Becky turn my life into a digital yard sale. She spent her days prowling around the house, phone in hand, taking photos of everything that wasn't nailed down. My vintage tools, the silver tea set Lucille loved, even my winter coats. She posted them on online marketplaces, haggling with strangers over $5, while I sat in a folding chair in the corner, invisible to her. She would look right through me, telling buyers on speakerphone that she was clearing out an estate because the owner had passed away. "I am sitting right here," I would say, my voice raspy. She would just roll her eyes and tap her temple, signaling to Darnell that I was having another episode. On the third afternoon, the air in the house was thick with tension. I was sitting in the corner nursing a cup of lukewarm water, watching Becky rifle through a box of old keepsakes she had dragged out of the closet. She pulled out a framed watercolor painting. It wasn't a masterpiece. The perspective was a little off, and the colors were faded. But it was a painting Lucille had made on our honeymoon 40 years ago. It was a picture of the cabin where we stayed, where we decided to start a family. It was the single most valuable thing in the house to me. Becky held it up, wrinkling her nose. "Ugh, look at this trash," she said to Darnell, who was eating a sandwich on the kitchen counter. "Who frames something this ugly? It looks like a child did it." "That is my wife's painting," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Put it down." Becky looked at me, a cruel smile playing on her lips. It is clutter, Sai. We are decluttering. Nobody is going to buy this. The frame is scratched and the art is amateur. It is just taking up space. She walked over to the large kitchen trash can, the shiny stainless steel one she had bought with my credit card. Do not do it, I warned, gripping the arms of my folding chair. If you throw that away, I will make you regret it. She laughed, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. What are you going to do, Sai? Call the police again. Tell them I threw away a piece of paper. She held my gaze, her eyes challenging me, daring me to move. Then she dropped the painting into the trash. I heard the glass crack as it hit the bottom of the can. Something inside me snapped, but it wasn't a snap of violence, it was a snap of clarity. The last thread of mercy I had for them severed in that moment. I did not get up, I did not scream. I just watched her wipe her hands on her pants as if she had touched something filthy. Later, Darnell, she said, take the trash out. I sat there for hours, staring at that trash can, waiting. I waited until the sun went down. I waited until they ordered pizza and ate it without offering me a slice. I waited until they went upstairs to my bedroom and shut the door. I waited until I heard the heavy, rhythmic snoring of my son, the sound of a man who sleeps the sleep of the unjust. Only then did I move. I stood up my legs, screaming in protest, but I ignored it. I walked silently to the trash can and retrieved the painting. The glass was shattered, but the paper was intact. I carefully pulled it out, brushing off a piece of onion skin. I folded it gently and placed it inside my shirt next to my heart. Then I turned my attention to the basement. They had put a padlock on the door from the outside, thinking that would keep me out. They thought the basement was just a storage space, a place where I kept the imaginary gold bars they were so desperate to find. But they didn't know the house. I built this house. I knew that the air return vent in the pantry wasn't just a vent. It was a service access panel I had installed 30 years ago to run unauthorized cabling. It was tight, and I was old, but rage is a powerful lubricant. I moved the cereal boxes quietly, removed the grill, and squeezed my body into the narrow space. It dropped me down into the utility closet behind the furnace right inside the basement. I stepped out into the cool, dark air of the underground. The smell of concrete and ozone filled my lungs. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I didn't need to. I walked past the workbench where Darnell had left his drill. I walked past the gouges they had made in the steel door of my private office. They had tried for hours to drill through that lock, but they failed because they were using a standard bit on a biometric reinforced alloy mechanism. They were trying to break into a bank vault with a toothpick. I reached under the lip of the workbench and pressed a hidden switch. A small panel slid open, revealing a keypad. I typed in a code, a sequence of numbers that corresponded to the dates of Lucille S. birth and death. The heavy steel door clicked. It didn't creak. It hissed as the pneumatic seals released. I pushed it open and stepped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of LED lights. There was no gold here, no stacks of cash, no diamonds. To Darnell and Becky, this room would look like a disappointment. It was filled with filing cabinets and a large server rack that hummed with a low, steady power. The walls were covered in framed blueprints, not of houses, but of bank vaults, Federal Reserves, and high-security data centers. Darnell thought I was a construction worker. He thought I poured concrete. He never asked why I was flown to New York or D.C. for weeks at a time in the 90s. He never asked why we had money for private school, even though I drove a beat-up truck. He saw the calluses on my hands and assumed I was a laborer. He didn't know I was the architect. I was the man the banks called when they wanted to keep people like Darnell out. I sat down at the desk, my old leather chair groaning under my weight. It was the first time I had been comfortable in days. I looked at the monitors. The server was running perfectly. This wasn't just a computer. It was a repository of 30 years of intellectual property. Patents on locking mechanisms, security algorithms, structural vulnerability assessments. The data on these drives was worth more than the house, the cars, and Darnell's life combined. There were companies that paid me royalties every month just to use the designs stored in these hard drives. That was the source of the money Darnell was trying to steal. He was looking for the golden egg, but he was trying to kill the goose. I typed a command into the keyboard, waking the system up. I pulled up the security feed from the cameras I had installed throughout the house, cameras Darnell didn't know existed. I saw them sleeping in my bed. I saw Becky's phone on the nightstand buzzing with notifications from her sales. I saw the emptiness of my home. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, but I pushed it down. Sadness was a luxury I could no longer afford. I opened a secure browser. It was time to initiate the next phase of the protocol. I couldn't access my bank accounts because of the court order, but I had other assets. I had favors owed to me. I navigated to a secure messaging board, an encrypted channel used by industry professionals. I typed a message to a user named Shark Vance. Need a meeting. Code red. Situation strictly confidential. Bring the Omega file. I hit enter. Then I reached into the bottom drawer of the desk and pulled out a small burner phone I kept charged for emergencies. I hid it in my pocket. I looked around the room one last time. This was my legacy. My mind, my work, my life. Becky had called it junk. She had thrown Lucille S. painting in the trash. They wanted to put me in a home and sell this house to the highest bidder, not realizing they were sitting on top of a diamond mine they were too stupid to mine. I stood up wincing as my leg cramped. I had to go back. I had to sneak back up through the vent and lie down on that air mattress before they woke up. I had to continue playing the victim. But as I turned off the monitors, plunging the room back into darkness, I smiled in the gloom. They thought they had trapped a mouse. They didn't realize they had locked themselves in a cage with a tiger. Tomorrow I would make the call. Tomorrow the shark would come to the water. And Darnell and Becky were about to find out that blood is thicker than water, but money is thicker than blood. I slipped out of the room, the heavy door sealing with a whisper, locking away the truth for one more night. I climbed back up the vent, my heart hard as stone, ready for the war that was coming with the sunrise. I waited until the smell of burnt toast and cheap coffee filled the hallway before I made my move. Darnell and Becky were arguing in the kitchen, their voices low and hissed like steam escaping a cracked pipe. They were fighting about money, which was ironic considering they thought they had just stolen a fortune. But thieves never trust each other, and panic was setting in. I sat on the edge of the deflated air mattress, my back stiff, my bad leg throbbing a dull rhythm of pain. I needed to make a call, but I couldn't use the landline because they had unplugged it and they had confiscated my cell phone the night before, claiming I was calling 911 to report imaginary fires. They thought they had cut off my communications. They forgot that I was hiding things in this house before Darnell was even born. I shuffled into the kitchen, leaning heavily on my cane, playing the part of the confused old man shuffling toward his breakfast. Darnell looked up from his phone, his eyes bloodshot and dark circles hanging like bruises under them. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, a man being hunted. "Morning, Dad," he muttered, turning his screen away so I couldn't see it. "Sit down, Becky will get you some oatmeal." I sat at the small breakfast nook, the only table left since they sold the dining set. Becky slammed a bowl of lumpy gray sludge in front of me, not even looking at me. Her eyes were glued to a tablet scrolling through listings of luxury cars. She was spending the money before she even had it. "I need my fiber," I said, my voice raspy. "Get me the bran flakes from the pantry." Becky sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Just eat the oatmeal." "Sigh, it is good for you." "I want my flakes," I insisted, tapping my spoon on the table like a petulant child. "Doctor said I need fiber. Top shelf behind the flour." Darnell rubbed his temples. "Just get him the damn cereal, Becky, so he shuts up." Becky stomped to the pantry and grabbed the dusty box of generic bran flakes from the top shelf. She slammed it on the table in front of me. "Happy," she snapped. I smiled, a vacuous, empty smile. "Very." I poured a mountain of flakes into my bowl, covering the oatmeal. I dug my hand into the box, ignoring Becky's look of disgust. My fingers brushed past the dry cereal until they hit something hard and plastic taped to the inside cardboard. I ripped it free, concealing it in my palm as I brought a handful of dry flakes to my mouth. It was a Nokia 3310, a brick of a phone from 20 years ago with a battery that could last through a nuclear winter. I slipped it into the pocket of my robe while pretending to wipe crumbs off my lap. "I am going to the bathroom," I announced, standing up. "Make it quick," Darnell said, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. "We have people coming over later." I shuffled down the hall and locked myself in the guest bathroom. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run loud to mask my voice. I pulled out the phone and powered it up. The screen glowed green, a beacon of hope in the tiled gloom. I dialed a number I had memorized decades ago. It rang once, twice. Marcus Vance did not have voicemail. He had people who screened his calls, but he had a personal line for 5 people in the world, and I was one of them. "Yeah," a voice answered, deep and smooth like expensive bourbon poured over gravel. "It is Cy," I said, my voice dropping the senile act instantly. I am in. There was a pause on the other end, then a low chuckle. I wondered when you would call, old man. I heard you got yourself into a bind. Word travels fast, I said. My son has gone rogue, Marcus. He forged a power of attorney. He has frozen my accounts. He thinks he is running the show. Marcus Vance was not just a lawyer. He was a force of nature, a 60-year-old black man who grew up in the same neighborhood I did but took a different path. While I built vaults, Marcus learned how to destroy people legally. He wore $5,000 bespoke suits, drove a Bentley, and had a reputation in Chicago that made grown men cross the street to avoid him. They called him the Shark, not because he was a predator, but because he never stopped moving, and if he smelled blood in the water, he ate you whole. He was the only man I trusted with the keys to the kingdom because he was the only one rich enough not to need my money. Listen to me, Cy, Marcus said, his tone shifting from amused to serious. It is worse than you think. I have been monitoring the chatter since you sent that message last night. Darnell isn't just trying to manage your assets, he is liquidating them. I know, I said, gripping the sink. He sold the furniture. No, Cy, Marcus interrupted. Not the furniture. The house. I felt the blood drain from my face. The house. My fortress. The place where I raised him, where Lucille died. He is in talks with the Apex Development Group, Marcus continued. They are fast-tracking a sale. Commercial zoning cash offer demolition clause. They want the land, Cy, not the house. They want to bulldoze it and put up condos. My hand tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. How much? $2 million, Marcus said. Quick close. 30 days. $2 million. The house was worth $3 million easily, but Darnell was selling it for parts at a discount. Why the rush, Marcus? Why is he so desperate? Because your boy has been playing games he doesn't understand, Marcus said, his voice cold. He is into the bookies, Cy. Deep. He owes $500,000 on sports bets and another $200,000 to some loan sharks out of Gary. They gave him a deadline, end of the month or he pays in blood. I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool mirror. It all made sense now. The desperation, the forgery, the moving truck in the middle of the night. Darnell wasn't just greedy, he was terrified. He was trying to sell my life to save his own. He was going to throw me into a state home and let them tear down my legacy just to cover his bad bets. The sadness I felt was profound, a deep ache in my chest, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, steely resolve. He had made his choice. He chose the Sharks over his father. Now he was going to learn why you never bet against the house, especially when your father built the house. Can you stop it? I asked, already knowing the answer. I can file an injunction, Marcus said. I can tie this up in court for years. I can prove the forgery. I can get the notary disbarred. I can rain hellfire on him, Cy. Just say the word. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, the gray stubble on my chin, the lines etched around my eyes. I looked old, but my eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of a man who was done being a victim. No, I said softly. Do not stop him. Marcus was silent for a second, surprised. What did you say? I said, do not stop him. I repeated, my voice gaining strength. Let him think he has won. Let him think the sale is going through. Let him sign the papers. Let him take the money. Cy, are you crazy? Marcus asked. Once he signs that deed, the house is gone. You will be on the street. No, I won't, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. Because he cannot sell what he does not own. Marcus paused, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his brilliant, ruthless mind. He started to laugh, a low, rumbling sound of appreciation. Oh, you sly old fox. You executed the transfer, didn't you? 10 years ago, I said. Right after Lucille got sick. We put the deed in the trust. The Protocol Omega Trust. And who is the trustee? Marcus asked, knowing the answer but wanting to hear me say it. You are, I said. And the beneficiary is a non-profit for inner-city engineering scholarships. I only have a life estate. I have the right to live here until I die, but I do not own the dirt underneath it. And neither does Darnell. Marcus laughed harder. So if he sells it, he is committing fraud on a massive scale. He is selling property that belongs to a charitable trust. That is federal, Cy. That is 20 years in prison. Exactly, I said. He wants to play the big shot. He wants to make deals. Let him make the biggest deal of his life. Let him take the cash from the developers. Let him pay off his sharks. And then when the dust settles and the title company runs the final check, let the hammer drop. I want you to prepare the file, Marcus. Get the original deed. Get the trust documents. But do not show your hand yet. Wait until the ink is dry on his contract. Wait until he spends the money. You are cold, Cy, Marcus said. but there was admiration in his voice. Ice cold. "He is trying to bury me, Marcus," I said, looking at the door as I heard Darnell's heavy footsteps in the hall. "I am just digging the hole a little deeper so he fits in it too." "Prepare Project X," I whispered. "And Marcus, bring the cavalry when I give the signal. Copy that." The shark is circling. I hung up and powered down the phone, slipping it back into my pocket. I flushed the toilet and splashed cold water on my face. I stared at myself one last time. Showtime, Cyrus. I unlocked the door and shuffled back into the kitchen, my cane tapping a weak, erratic rhythm. Darnell was still at the table, his leg bouncing like a jackhammer. "You took a long time, Dad," he snapped. "Stomach trouble," I mumbled, clutching my midsection. "Old age, son. Everything slows down." Darnell looked at me with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Yeah, well, hurry up and eat. We have people coming over at noon. Important people. Developers." I asked, playing dumb. "Something like that," Darnell said, looking away. "Just wear your nice sweater and try not to drool. I want you to sit in the wheelchair today." The wheelchair. I didn't need a wheelchair. I walked with a cane, but I could walk fine. Why, I asked. "Because it is safer," Darnell lied smoothly. "We do not want you falling while we have guests." "Just do it, Dad." Becky looked up from her tablet, her eyes gleaming. "And smile, Cy," she added. "We need everyone to see how happy and well cared for you are. It helps with the transition." The transition. They meant the sale. They wanted me to look frail and happy to validate their narrative that selling the house was for my own good. They wanted a prop. "Okay," I said meekly, sitting back down at my bowl of soggy bran flakes. "I will sit in the chair." I ate my cereal, forcing it down past the lump in my throat. $2 million. My son was selling my life for $2 million to save his own skin. He was going to parade me in front of strangers like a show dog while he signed away my home. But he didn't know that the ground he was standing on was already gone. He didn't know that the shark was in the water. And he didn't know that the old man eating cereal in the corner was counting down the minutes until his entire world exploded. I scraped the bottom of the bowl. Let them come. Let them bring the contracts. I was ready to sign. Because my signature wasn't just ink on paper anymore, it was the trigger on a trap door, and Darnell was standing right on the X. At noon they dressed me up like a corpse, ready for an open casket viewing. Darnell pulled a charcoal gray suit out of a plastic bag, one he had bought at a discount store, because all my bespoke suits were probably sold at a pawn shop 3 days ago. It smelled of chemicals and cheap polyester, and it was a size too big, hanging off my frame like loose skin. Then came the wheelchair. It was a rented hospital model with squeaky wheels and vinyl seats that stuck to your skin. I stood in the hallway, leaning on my cane, watching Darnell unfold it with a snap. "Sit down, Dad," he ordered, pointing a finger at the chair. "I do not need that," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I can walk fine. My leg hurts, but it works." "Sit down," Becky hissed, coming up behind me and shoving me hard between the shoulder blades. I stumbled forward, catching myself on the armrests before collapsing into the seat. "We do not need you stumbling around, spilling wine on the investors," she whispered, her face inches from mine. "You are going to sit there, you are going to look frail, and you are going to smile like a happy little vegetable. Do you understand? If you mess this up, Cy, I swear I will put you in a state facility so bad you will beg for death." I looked at her, at the heavy makeup trying to hide the stress lines around her eyes, and I nodded slowly. I understood perfectly. They needed a prop. They needed the sad story of the ailing father to justify the rush sale, to explain why they were liquidating a prime asset for cash. If I looked capable, if I looked sharp, the buyers might ask why I wasn't signing the papers myself. But if I was just a drooling old man in a wheelchair, Darnell became the hero, the burdened son making the hard choices. "Fine," I said, settling into the chair. "Wheel me out." The doorbell rang, echoing through the house that no longer felt like mine. Darnell smoothed his hair, fixed his tie, and put on his best salesman smile. "Showtime," he muttered. He wheeled me into the dining room, which had been restaged with rented furniture that looked too modern and too cheap for the space. A glass table, chrome chairs, abstract art that looked like spilled paint. It had no soul. 2 men and a woman walked in, led by Becky, who was playing the gracious hostess. These were the sharks from Apex Development. Mr. Sterling, the lead guy, looked like he was carved out of granite and money. He wore a suit that cost more than Darnell's car, and his eyes scanned the room, not looking for beauty but for square footage and demolition costs. Ms. Kincaid, his associate, was younger, holding a tablet and tapping away before she even said hello. and a third man, an engineer named Evans, who carried a laser measure and a flashlight. Mr. Blackwood Sterling said, extending a hand to Darnell, not me. A pleasure. We are ready to move fast on this if the property checks out. Darnell shook his hand, pumping it a little too eagerly. It will check out, Mr. Sterling. My father maintained it impeccably for 40 years until his health declined. Sterling looked down at me sitting in the wheelchair, my hands folded in my lap. I gave him a vacant, watery smile and a slight tremor of the head. He looked away uncomfortable, just as I intended. He didn't see a threat. He saw a liability. Sad situation, Sterling muttered, but the location is prime. Let's eat first, Darnell suggested, ushering them to the table. My wife has prepared a lovely lunch. We sat down. They placed me at the end of the table facing the window. Becky sat to my right, close enough to control me, but far enough to pretend she wasn't. The lunch was catered expensive steak and lobster, trying to project wealth Darnell didn't have. He was spending the last of his credit on this show. So Mr. Blackwood Sterling said, cutting into his steak, "We have reviewed the zoning. We can put up 6 luxury units on this lot. Demolition would start next month." Darnell nodded, chewing quickly. "That sounds fantastic. We just want what is best for Dad. The proceeds will go to his long-term care facility." A lie. The proceeds were going to a bookie named Vinny and a loan shark named Sal. Ms. Kincaid looked up from her tablet. "The inspection report from the city is a little dated," she said. 98. Have there been any structural updates since then? Darnell froze his fork halfway to his mouth. He didn't know. He never asked. He thought houses just stood up by magic. "Oh, absolutely," he lied, recovering quickly. "Dad was always tinkering. New roof, new pipes. It is solid as a rock." Under the table, Becky's heel dug into my shin. It was a sharp warning spike of pain. "Smile," she whispered through her teeth, her lips barely moving. "Nod your head." I nodded slowly, giving a little hum of agreement. "Solid," I mumbled, drooling a little on purpose. "Solid rock." Evans, the engineer, looked at me, then at the ceiling. "I noticed some hairline fractures in the drywall near the foyer," he said. "Usually just settling, but in this area near the lake, the soil can be tricky. Liquefaction risks." This was it. The opening. I had spent 40 years keeping this house perfect. I had reinforced the foundation with helical piers in 2005. This house could survive a magnitude 8 earthquake. But they didn't know that. To them, I was just the confused old man who built it. I dropped my fork. It clattered loudly against the rented china, drawing everyone's sighs. I looked at Evans, my eyes wide and unfocused. "The mud," I said, my voice trembling. "The mud remembers." The table went silent. Sterling stopped chewing. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwood?" he asked. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Becky's foot stomped down on my toes, crushing them inside the cheap shoe. The pain was blinding, but I used it. I let it fuel the tears that welled up in my eyes. "We built it on the swamp," I rasped, making my voice sound thin and terrified. I told Lucille. I told her the concrete wouldn't dry. It never dried. It is sinking, every year another inch, down into the dark. Darnell laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound that fooled no one. "Dad is having a moment," he said, reaching for his wine glass with a shaking hand. "He is confused. This isn't a swamp, Dad. This is high ground." "No!" I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. "The water is under the slab. I hear it at night. Gurgling, eating the rebar. Snap, crack, pop. Just like the cereal." "The foundation is cracked, Darnell. Why do you think I put the carpet down? To hide the hole. The big hole where the rats come in." I saw Evans. The engineer narrowed his eyes. He pulled a notebook out of his pocket and scribbled something down. "Carpet hiding cracks," Sterling asked, looking at Darnell. "Is there carpet over the slab in the basement?" Darnell went pale. He didn't know. He hadn't even looked at the floor in the basement. He was too busy trying to break into the safe room. "Ah, yes," Darnell stammered. "Just for comfort. I mean, Dad liked it cozy. But there are no cracks." "Absolutely not." Becky's hand found the soft flesh of my underarm and twisted. She pinched me so hard I felt the skin bruise instantly. Her fingernails were like talons. "Dad needs his medicine," she announced, standing up abruptly. "He gets agitated when his blood sugar drops. Excuse us for a moment." She grabbed the handles of my wheelchair and yanked me back from the table, nearly tipping me over. I let out a yelp of pain, which I am sure the guests interpreted as senile distress. She wheeled me into the kitchen, and the moment the swinging door closed, she spun the chair around and slapped me. It wasn't a hard slap, just enough to sting, enough to humiliate. "Shut up," she hissed, her face contorted with rage. "Shut your mouth, you old bat. One more word about mud or rats and I will wheel you down the stairs myself." I looked at her holding my cheek. I didn't cry. I didn't cower. I looked right into her eyes, and for a second I let the mask slip. Just for a second I let her see the engineer, the man who calculated breaking points for a living. I let her see that I wasn't broken. I was waiting. "Did I say the wrong thing, Becky?" I asked, my voice suddenly steady and deep sans the tremor. "Or did I just remind them to check the one thing you cannot paint over?" She froze, her hand raised to strike again. She saw it. She saw the clarity. But before she could process it, Darnell burst through the door, sweating profusely. "They want to see the basement," he panicked. "Evans wants to pull up the carpet. Dad, what the hell were you talking about? There is no hole." Becky recovered instantly, shoving her fear down. "He is lying, Darnell," she snapped. "He is sabotaging us. Go out there and tell them he is off his meds. Tell them we will pull up the carpet ourselves. Just keep them signing the papers." Darnell looked at me with pure hatred. "You are trying to ruin me," he whispered. "After everything I have done for you. Everything you have done for me," I repeated softly. "Like robbing me. Like forging my name. Go sell the house, Darnell. Go sign the papers. But remember, when you sign a contract, you are buying the problems too." Darnell stormed back out to the dining room. Becky glared at me one last time before following him, plastering a fake smile on her face. I sat alone in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I rubbed my bruised arm. I adjusted my tie. I could hear them in the other room, Darnell laughing too loud, Evans asking hard questions about soil composition. I knew the house was solid. I knew the foundation was reinforced concrete rated for a bomb shelter. Evans would find nothing but pristine slab under that carpet. But the seed was planted. Doubt is like rust. Once it starts, it spreads. Sterling would sign the deal because the land was too valuable to pass up, but he would lowball them now. He would add clauses. He would rush the closing to minimize risk. And Darnell, desperate and terrified of his loan sharks, would sign anything. He would sign his own death warrant just to get the cash. I wheeled myself over to the counter and poured a glass of tap water. My hand was steady. The dinner party was a disaster for them, but a tactical victory for me. I had forced them to rush. I had forced them to act out of fear, not logic. And when men act out of fear, they make mistakes. The shark was waiting in the deep water, and Darnell had just jumped off the boat. I took a sip of water and waited for them to come back and drag me to my prison. Let them. Every bruise they gave me was just another line of evidence in the file Marcus was building. The pain was temporary. The victory would be permanent. I smiled at my reflection in the dark oven window. The old man in the wheelchair was gone. Cyrus, the architect, was back on the job. And the demolition was just beginning. The front door clicked shut behind Mr. Sterling and his team, and the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. I sat in the middle of the foyer in that rented wheelchair, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I could hear Darnell breathing hard behind me, ragged, wet gasps like a drowning swimmer. Becky had vanished upstairs, probably to scream into a pillow or check the current price of gold. But Darnell was right there, vibrating with an energy that was equal parts rage and terror. Suddenly, he grabbed the handles of my wheelchair and spun me around so fast my neck snapped back. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. His tie was loosened, his expensive shirt was soaked through with sweat, and his eyes were wild wide and rimmed with red. "You ruin everything!" he screamed, his voice cracking. He kicked the wheel of the chair, sending a jolt of pain up my bad leg, but I didn't flinch. I just looked at him with the cold, detached gaze of an engineer inspecting a failed support beam. "Is that what you wanted, Dad?" he shouted, pacing back and forth in the narrow hall, pulling at his hair. "To humiliate me. To tell them the house is sinking. They knocked $400,000 off the offer because of your little story about the mud. 400 grand gone because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." I stayed silent, letting his words bounce off me. He stopped pacing and lunged at me, grabbing the lapels of my cheap suit. He hauled me halfway out of the chair, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale wine on his breath, and beneath that, the sour metallic reek of pure fear. "Listen to me, old man," he hissed, shaking me. "I am done playing nice. I am done with the oatmeal and the wheelchair and the pretending. You are going to fix this. You are going to sign the full transfer deed tonight. No more power of attorney loopholes. I want your name on the line, transferring the title directly to me so I can close this deal tomorrow morning." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger, a desperate, cornered animal. "Why the rush, Darnell?" I asked quietly. "Why tomorrow?" He let go of me, shoving me back into the chair. He backed away until he hit the wall, and then he slid down it, collapsing onto the floor. The rage drained out of him, leaving only a hollow, trembling shell. He put his head in his hands and started to sob. It was a pathetic sound, the sound of a man who realized he had dug a grave too deep to climb out of. "Because they are going to kill me, Dad," he whispered. The air in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Who is going to kill you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Sal Darnell choked out. "Sal and the outfit from Gary. I borrowed money, Dad, a lot of money. I thought I had a sure thing. Crypto futures. It was supposed to triple in a month. I was going to pay them back and buy you a new car. I was going to be rich." He looked up at me, his face wet with tears and snot. "But it crashed. It all crashed. I owe them $500,000, Dad. Principal and interest. They gave me until Friday. If I don't pay, they said they would break my legs first. Then they said they would come for Becky. Then they said they would burn this house down with all of us inside." I looked at the man curled up on my floor. $500,000. He had gambled away $500,000 on magic internet money, and now he was selling my legacy to pay for his stupidity. He wasn't just a thief, he was a fool. And worse, he was a coward. He brought danger to my doorstep. He brought the threat of fire and violence into the home I built to keep Lucille safe. I didn't feel pity. I felt a cold, hard knot of disappointment tighten in my gut. I realized then that the Darnell I loved, the little boy who used to help me carry my toolbox, was dead. He had died a long time ago, replaced by this sweating, sobbing mess who would sell his own father to save his skin. "So that is it," I said, my voice flat. "You are selling my house to pay a loan shark." "I have no choice," he pleaded, crawling toward me on his hands and knees. "Please, Dad. You have to sign. If the developers buy the house, I can pay Sal off tomorrow. I will have enough left over to put you in a nice home, a really nice one, private room, garden view, I promise. Just sign the deed. Save my life, Dad. Please." He grabbed my hand, the hand that had held him when he was a baby, the hand that had signed his tuition checks. His grip was clammy and desperate. He was begging me to save him from the consequences of his own greed. And in that moment I made a choice that severed the last emotional tie binding me to him. I looked at the ceiling, at the crown molding I had installed myself. I looked at the solid oak floorboards. This house was not just wood and brick. It was a symbol, and Darnell was unworthy of it. If I refused to sign, he would likely forge my signature again, or worse, he might actually get desperate enough to hurt me physically to stage an accident. But if I signed, if I gave him exactly what he wanted, I would be handing him the shovel to dig his own grave. Because he didn't know about the trust. He didn't know about Protocol Omega. He didn't know that by signing that deed, I wasn't giving him the house, I was giving him a one-way ticket to federal prison for real estate fraud. I looked down at him. "Get up," I said. He looked at me, confused by the change in my tone. "What?" "Get up, Darnell," I repeated. "Stop crying on the floor. It is embarrassing." He scrambled to his feet, wiping his face with his sleeve, looking at me with a flicker of hope. "Will you do it?" he asked. "Will you sign?" I leaned back in the wheelchair, steepling my fingers. "I will sign," I said. Darnell let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. "Oh, thank God. Thank God, Dad. You won't regret it." "I promise I will." "Shut up." I cut him off. "I am not doing it for you. I am doing it because I am tired. I am tired of the oatmeal. I am tired of the sleeping on the floor. I am tired of looking at your face. I will sign the transfer deed. I will give you the house. You can pay off your shark. You can give Becky her money. But I have a condition." "Anything," Darnell said, nodding vigorously. "Anything you want. You want the master bedroom back until the sale closes. Done. You want steak for dinner? Done." I shook my head. "I do not want the bedroom. I do not want steak. I want the basement." Darnell blinked, confusion clouding his face. "The basement. Everything in it," I said. "Before you hand the keys over to Sterling and his wrecking crew, I want everything in that basement packed up and moved to a storage unit of my choosing. Every box, every paper, every piece of equipment, especially the contents of the locked room. You do not open it. You do not look inside. You just move it. Darnell hesitated. I could see the gears turning in his head. He and Becky were convinced I had cash hidden down there. They thought the locked room was a treasure chest. If he agreed, he was giving up the potential gold mine. But if he refused, he lost the house, the $2 million, and probably his kneecaps. It was a simple calculation. Greed versus survival. Why, he asked suspiciously. What is down there, Dad? Just my life, Darnell. I said, my voice softening just enough to sell the lie. My drawings. Your mother's old letters. My prototypes. It is junk to you. You call it trash. But it is all I have left. If I am going to a home, I want my memories. Take the house, Darnell. Take the money. Just leave me my work. Darnell studied my face looking for the trap, but he didn't see one. He saw an old man clinging to the past. He saw a trade-off he could live with. $2 million was real money. The mystery of the basement was a gamble. He chose the sure thing. Okay, he said, exhaling. Okay, Dad, deal. You sign the papers tonight. Tomorrow morning I will hire a crew to clean out the basement. We won't touch a thing. We will put it all in storage in your name. I nodded slowly. Get the papers, I said. He ran upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, his energy returning now that he saw a way out. I sat alone in the hallway listening to his footsteps. He thought he had just negotiated the deal of a lifetime. He thought he was trading a basement full of old paper for $2 million. He didn't know that the paper in that basement was the only thing of value I owned. He didn't know that by moving it to a storage unit in my name, he was helping me secure the evidence that would destroy him. And he certainly didn't know that the house he was about to sell didn't belong to me anymore. He rushed back down a few minutes later, holding a thick stack of legal documents and a pen. His hands were shaking as he held them out to me. Here, Dad, he said, breathless. Just sign here, and initial here. This transfers the title completely to me. I took the pen. My hand hovered over the paper. I looked at the deed. It described the property, the lot lines, the structure. It was a standard quitclaim deed. By signing it, I was stating that I, Cyrus Blackwood, was transferring all my interest in the property to Darnell Blackwood. Since my interest was technically only a life estate residing in the trust, this document was legally worthless for selling the land but perfectly sufficient for proving fraud. I looked at Darnell one last time. This was the point of no return. If I signed this, I was sealing his fate. I was sending my son to prison. I looked for hesitation in my heart. I looked for that spark of paternal instinct that says protect him no matter what. I found nothing. I found only the memory of him standing over me with a crowbar, the memory of him selling Lucille's piano, the memory of him saying, "It is not personal, Dad, it is just business." Well, Darnell, I thought, gripping the pen. Business works both ways. I pressed the pen to the paper. I signed my name. Not the shaky signature of a dementia patient, but the firm, sharp signature of a man who drafts blueprints. Cyrus, the architect Blackwood. Darnell snatched the papers away the moment I finished staring at the signature like it was a winning lottery ticket. Yes, he whispered, kissing the paper. Yes. Thank you, Dad. You saved me. He didn't say I love you. He didn't say I am sorry. He just said you saved me. I looked at him, my face impassive. Just remember our deal, Darnell, I said. The basement, tomorrow. Do not make me regret this. He laughed a giddy, hysterical sound. Don't worry, old man. You can have your junk. I am going to be rich. He ran off to find Becky, leaving me alone in the hallway. I sat there for a long time, listening to them celebrate upstairs. They were popping champagne again. They were toasting to their brilliance, to their survival. I rested my hands on the handle of my cane. Enjoy it, son, I whispered to the empty house. Enjoy the champagne, because it is the last expensive drink you are going to have for about 20 years. I wheeled myself into the guest room and lay down on the air mattress. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I lay there visualizing the next steps. Tomorrow the basement would be cleared. My servers, my files, my life would be safe. And then the clock would start ticking. 30 days until closing. 30 days for Darnell to spend money he didn't have. 30 days for the trap to snap shut. I smiled in the darkness. The shark was hungry, and dinner was served. The ink on the transfer deed was barely dry when the celebration upstairs turned into an interrogation. I was lying on the air mattress in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and counting the cracks in the plaster when the door flew open. Becky stood there, framed by the hallway light, looking like an avenging angel if angels wore designer tracksuits and carried the stench of cheap desperation. Darnell hovered behind her, looking like a man who had just realized he sold his soul for magic beans and was starting to suspect the beans were just painted rocks. "Get up!" Becky barked. I sat up, slowly wincing as my bad leg protested the movement. "What now?" I asked, my voice weary. "I signed the papers. The house is yours." Darnell told me about the deal, she spat, stepping into the room. "He says you traded a $2 million house for the junk in the basement, for some old papers and drawings." "That is right," I said, reaching for my cane. "Sentimental value. You wouldn't understand. Sentimental value, my ass." She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You are a lot of things, Cyrus, but you are not sentimental. You are a hoarder, maybe. A stubborn old mule, definitely. But you don't trade a mansion for scrapbooks unless the scrapbooks are made of bearer bonds." She walked closer, her eyes narrowing. "What is in that room, Cy?" "Gold. Cash. Diamonds from your wife." "Just my work," I said, keeping my face as blank as a fresh sheet of drywall. "Blueprints. Patents. Things that only matter to an engineer." "Liar," she hissed. "Darnell thinks you are just a crazy old man clinging to the past, but I know better. I see how you look at that door. You protect it like it is the crown jewels. And if you are willing to give up the house to keep it, that means whatever is inside is worth more than $2 million. She turned to Darnell, who was wringing his hands in the doorway. "Call the guy," she ordered. Darnell looked nervous. "Becky, Dad said we couldn't open it. That was the deal. If we open it, he might rescind the signature." "He cannot rescind anything," she snapped. "He signed the deed. It is done. The house is ours, which means the basement is ours, and everything in it is ours. Call the guy, Darnell, or I will." Darnell looked at me, then at her. He pulled out his phone. I didn't say a word. I didn't protest. I just watched them. Greed is a funny thing. It blinds you to danger, but it also makes you predictable. I knew Becky wouldn't be able to resist. She was like a raccoon seeing something shiny in a trap. She had to reach for it, even if it meant getting crushed. An hour later, a van pulled up to the driveway. It wasn't a moving truck this time. It was a white panel van with no markings. A man got out carrying a heavy duffel bag. He looked like a thumb, with legs thick neck-shaved, head tattoos creeping up his collar. This was not a licensed locksmith. This was a safecracker, probably one of Darnell's connections from the gambling world. They led him down to the basement. I followed, shuffling along with my cane, clutching a thermos of herbal tea I had managed to make while they were arguing. I found an old folding chair in the corner of the basement, one they hadn't bothered to sell because it was rusted, and I set it up about 10 feet from the steel door. I sat down, unscrewed the cap of my thermos, and poured a cup of steaming tea. The safecracker, whose name turned out to be Heavy, dropped his bag on the concrete with a thud that shook the floor. He looked at the door, then at Becky. "This is it," he grunted. "That is it," Becky said, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Open it. I do not care if you have to blow it off the hinges. Just get it open." Heavy walked up to the door. He ran his hand over the steel surface. He tapped it with a knuckle. It didn't ring like hollow metal. It thudded like a tombstone. He inspected the lock mechanism, or at least where the lock mechanism should have been. There was no keyhole, no keypad, just a smooth, seamless expanse of gray metal. "Where is the handle?" he asked. "There isn't one," I said, taking a sip of my tea. "It is biometric and voice-activated, and it has a fail-safe that engages if you tamper with it." Becky spun around. "Shut up, old man. Don't listen to him. Just drill it." Heavy pulled a massive industrial drill out of his bag, the kind used for boring into concrete foundations. He fitted a diamond-tipped bit onto the chuck. He positioned the drill right where the locking bolts would be on a standard door. "Stand back," he warned. He leaned his weight into the drill and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening, a high-pitched shriek that bounced off the concrete walls and dug straight into your eardrums. Sparks flew, showering Heavy S-boots. I watched calmly, blowing on my tea to cool it. They were trying to drill through grade 9 titanium alloy, reinforced with a tungsten carbide mesh. I had designed that door for a Federal Reserve prototype in 1998. It was designed to withstand a thermal lance, a diamond drill, and C4 explosives. A low-level thug with a Home Depot drill had better odds of scratching a diamond with a banana. Heavy pushed harder, sweating profusely. The drill whined in protest. Smoke began to rise from the bit, acrid and biting. Suddenly there was a loud snap. The drill bit shattered, sending a shard of hot metal flying across the room. It embedded itself in the drywall, inches from Darnell's head. Darnell yelped and ducked, covering his face. Heavy cursed, dropping the drill and shaking his hand. "This ain't steel," he growled, looking at the door with new respect. "This is military-grade stuff. I burned through $200 worth of bit in 30 seconds and I didn't even scratch the paint." Becky was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. "Try the hinges," she screamed. "Cut the hinges off." Heavy shook his head. "The hinges are internal, lady. You cannot get to them. And the frame is set in reinforced concrete. This ain't a door. It is a wall that moves." I took another sip of tea. The mint and chamomile tasted sweet against the bitterness of the moment. "I told you, Darnell," I said, my voice cutting through the silence that followed the drill's death. "You should have just moved it. Now you are just making noise." Becky marched over to me and slapped the cup out of my hand. Hot tea splashed over my pants and onto the floor, but I didn't flinch. I just looked at the puddle spreading on the concrete. "Stop playing games, Si," she shrieked, her face contorted into a mask of pure ugly rage. "Open the door. Open it right now, or so help me God." I looked up at her, meeting her crazy eyes with a calm, steady gaze. "Or what, Becky? You will hit me again. You will take away my oatmeal. You already have the house. You won't find what you are looking for in there. There is no money." "Open it," she screamed, grabbing the lapels of my robe and shaking me. "I know you have codes. I know you have a way in. Input the code." I gently removed her hands from my robe. My grip was stronger than she expected, and for a second she looked surprised. "No," I said simply. Becky stepped back, breathing hard. She looked at the impenetrable door, then at Darnell, who was cowering in the corner, then at the safecracker, who was packing up his tools. "I am done here," Heavy said, zipping up his bag. "You want that open? You need plasma cutters and about 3 days. Or a tank. And I ain't got neither." He walked past Becky, holding out a grease-stained hand. "That'll be $500 for the service call. And the broken bit." Becky screamed in frustration, but she pulled a roll of cash from her pocket, my cash money she had stolen from my wallet earlier, and shoved it at him. "Get out!" she yelled. Heavy didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed the cash and bolted up the stairs, leaving us alone in the damp silence of the basement. Becky turned to me slowly. Her rage had cooled into something sharper, something more dangerous. It was the cold calculation of a predator that realizes brute force won't work, so it decides to go for the throat. "Okay, Si," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed off the walls. "You want to play the stubborn mule? You want to protect your little secrets? Fine. Keep the door locked. Keep your secrets. But actions have consequences." She walked over to Darnell and grabbed his arm, pulling him to stand next to her. "Show him the brochure, Darnell." Darnell fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a glossy trifold pamphlet. He wouldn't look at me. He handed it to her. Becky opened it and held it up to my face. It was a brochure for Shady Pines Memory Care Facility. But it wasn't the nice retirement home Darnell had promised. I knew this place. It was a state-funded warehouse for the indigent and the insane. It was where they put people who had no money, no family, and no hope. It was a place where people went in and never came out. "I called them this morning," Becky said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "They have a bed open in the high-security ward. For patients who are a danger to themselves and others, patients who hallucinate, patients who think they are secret agents or wealthy engineers, patients who get violent with family members." She leaned in close, her perfume cloying and sweet. "I have the paperwork ready, Si. Dr. Evans, the one Darnell paid off, he signed the commitment order an hour ago. We were going to be nice. We were going to let you stay in a nice place if you cooperated. But you just had to be difficult." She tapped the brochure with a manicured nail. "So here is the new deal. You open that door right now tonight and show us the money. Or tomorrow morning at sunrise, the van from Shady Pines comes to pick you up. And they do not use wheelchairs, Si. They use straitjackets." I looked at the brochure. I looked at the picture of the barred windows and the sterile white hallways. They were threatening to bury me alive. They were threatening to drug me, lock me away, and erase me from the world just so they could crack open a piggy bank that didn't exist. Fear spiked in my chest, cold and sharp. I was 72. If I went into that system, I might never get out. My legal battles, my plans. Protocol Omega. None of it would matter if I was sedated in a padded room. I looked at Darnell. He was staring at his shoes, unable to witness the cruelty he was allowing. He was weak. But Becky, she was pure iron. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow. This was the brink. This was the moment where the bluff either worked or I died. I looked at the steel door, the door I had built to keep thieves out. Now it was the only thing keeping me out of an asylum. If I opened it, they would see the empty room. They would see the servers. They would realize there was no cash, and their disappointment might turn violent. But if I didn't open it, the van was coming. I needed to buy time. I needed to get to the signing tomorrow. I needed to be free when Marcus dropped the hammer. I looked at Becky. "You are bluffing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You cannot just commit me." "Watch me," she hissed. "The van will be here at 6 a.m. You have until then to decide. Sleep on it, Cy, or don't. It might be your last night of freedom." She grabbed Darnell's arm and dragged him toward the stairs. He cast one last guilty look over his shoulder, but he didn't stop. They marched up the stairs, and I heard the heavy deadbolt slide home, locking me in the basement. I was trapped. Trapped with the door I couldn't open and the threat of a living death hanging over my head. I sat back down in the rusted chair. My tea was cold, my leg was throbbing, and for the first time since this war began, I felt truly afraid. Sunrise was 6 hours away. I looked at the steel door. I built it to be impenetrable. I built it to be a fortress. But as I sat there in the dark listening to the silence of the underground, I realized that every fortress eventually becomes a prison if you stay inside too long. I had to make a choice. Open the door and reveal the truth too early, or keep it closed and lose my mind. I closed my eyes and started to calculate the odds, because that is what engineers do. We calculate. And I calculated that tomorrow morning was going to be the most dangerous morning of my life. But if I played it right, it would also be the most expensive morning of theirs. I stared at the keypad hidden under the workbench. 6 hours. I had 6 hours to figure out how to turn a surrender into a trap. I settled into the chair and waited for the dawn. The shark was swimming, but the van was coming faster. It was time to roll the dice. Dawn broke with the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling in my driveway. I was still sitting in the rusted folding chair, my joints locked from the cold damp of the basement, but my mind was razor sharp. I heard the heavy footsteps on the stairs above. The lock turned with a harsh metallic click. The door swung open and light from the kitchen spilled down the stairs, blinding me for a moment. Becky stood at the top of the landing, silhouetted against the light like an executioner. Behind her stood 2 large men in white uniforms, holding thick leather straps. They were not doctors. They were orderlies from Shady Pines, the kind of men hired not for their bedside manner, but for their ability to subdue violent patients. "Time is up," Becky called down her voice, cheerful and terrifying. "The van is here. We have a nice padded room waiting for you. Unless..." She let the word hang in the air. Darnell peeked out from behind the orderlies, his face pale and sweaty. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He was letting his wife sell his father into captivity because he was too much of a coward to stop her. I stood up, leaning heavily on my cane, letting my hand tremble just enough to sell the performance. I looked at the orderlies, then at the steel door of my vault, then back at Becky. I played the part of the broken man, the old-timer who had run out of road. "Wait!" I croaked, my voice cracking. "Don't let them take me." Becky smiled a slow, predatory grin. She waved a hand at the orderlies, signaling them to hold back. "Are you ready to be reasonable, Cy?" she asked, descending a few steps. "I am listening." I looked at the steel door. I sighed a sound of total defeat. "I will open it," I said. "Just send them away. Please. I do not want to go to the asylum." Becky laughed, a sound of pure triumph. She turned to the orderlies. "Wait in the truck, guys. Grandpa is going to cooperate. But do not leave. If he tries anything funny, you come running." The men grunted and walked back up the stairs. We heard the front door close. Becky rushed down the stairs, followed by Darnell. Her eyes were glued to the vault door, her greed practically vibrating off her skin. She was already spending the money she thought was inside. She was picturing stacks of cash gold bars, maybe even bearer bonds from the 80s. "Do it," she ordered, pointing at the keypad. "Open it now." I limped over to the workbench. I reached underneath and flipped the hidden switch. The small panel slid open, revealing the keypad. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the numbers. "It is all I have," I whispered. "Just open the damn door," Darnell shouted, his patience snapping under the weight of his debts. I typed in the code, 1024, October 24th, the day Lucille died. The pneumatic seals hissed, releasing the air pressure with a sound like a dying breath. The heavy locking bolts retracted with a deep thud that shook the floor. Becky pushed me aside, almost knocking me over. She grabbed the edge of the heavy door and hauled it open, her eyes wide with anticipation. She stepped inside, ready to bathe in riches. Darnell was right behind her, practically drooling. I stayed back, watching from the doorway. The room was bathed in the cool hum of the server fans and the blue glow of the standby lights. Becky stopped dead in the center of the room. She looked left. She looked right. She looked at the floor. Then she spun around, her face contorted in confusion and rage. "Where is it?" she screamed. "Where is the money?" The room was exactly as I had left it. Rows of filing cabinets, a large drafting table covered in schematics, and the massive server rack blinking in the corner. There was no safe. There were no stacks of bills. There was no gold. Becky began to tear the room apart. She ripped open the filing cabinet drawers, dumping thousands of pages of architectural drawings onto the floor. She swept the blueprints off the table, searching for a false bottom. She kicked the server rack, denting the metal casing. "This is just paper," she shrieked, grabbing a handful of schematics and throwing them into the air like confetti. "It is just useless paper. Where did you hide it, Si? Where is the cash?" I stood in the doorway, leaning on my cane, my face a mask of sorrow. "I told you," I said quietly. "It is my work. It is my life. There is no cash, Becky. I never kept cash in the house." Darnell looked around the room, his face crumbling. "No," he moaned. "No, no, no. There has to be something. Mama's jewelry, the rainy day fund. Something." He started pulling books off the shelves, shaking them, hoping money would fall out. Nothing but dust and bookmarks hit the floor. Becky turned on me, her eyes wild. "You lied," she hissed, marching toward me. "You acted like this room was Fort Knox. You protected it like it was full of gold. Why? Why would you protect a room full of garbage?" "Because it is valuable to me," I said. "These are my designs, my patents." "Patents," she spat. "Patents do not pay the loan sharks, sigh. Patents do not buy luxury cars. You are worthless." She walked over to the desk where a single thick manila folder sat. It was the only thing she hadn't thrown on the floor yet. She grabbed it, hoping against hope that it contained a bank book or a stock certificate. She ripped it open. Inside was a stack of legal documents stamped with the seal of the U.S. Patent Office. It was the master file for the Blackwood algorithm, a dynamic encryption key system used by 3 major banking conglomerates. It generated royalties of $40,000 a month passively. It was worth millions in licensing fees alone. Becky looked at the papers. She saw diagrams of tumblers and lines of code. She saw technical jargon she didn't understand. To her, it looked like homework. It looked like boring, worthless trash. She screamed a sound of pure frustration and threw the folder directly at my face. It hit me in the chest, the papers scattering across the concrete floor at my feet. "You are a broke old man," she yelled, getting in my face, her spittle hitting my cheek. "You are nothing. You have nothing. You are just a senile hoarder protecting a pile of trash." I looked down at the papers scattered on the floor. The future of banking security lay at my feet, and she was stepping on it with her muddy heels. She had literally thrown away a fortune because she didn't have the intelligence to recognize it. I bent down slowly, painfully, and began to gather the papers. I clutched them to my chest like a shield. "I am sorry," I whispered, playing the broken man perfectly. "I thought you would understand what Darnell yelled, kicking a pile of blueprints, that we are ruined, that I am going to die because you decided to hoard paper instead of money." Becky grabbed Darnell by the collar, shaking him. "Focus," she snapped. "We still have the house. The deal closes at noon. We sell the house, we pay the sharks, and we dump him in a state home. Not Shady Pines that costs money. We dump him in the cheapest hole we can find." She turned back to me, her eyes cold and dead. "Get upstairs, Si. Wash your face. Put your suit back on. We are going to the title company. You are going to sign the final papers in front of the notary and the buyer. And if you say one word about mud or rats or anything other than 'yes, sir, thank you, sir,' I will drive you to the homeless shelter myself and leave you on the curb. Do you understand me?" I looked at her. I looked at the scattered remnants of my life's work on the floor. I clutched the patent file tighter. "Yes," I said softly. "I understand." "Good," she said. Now get out of my sight. You make me sick." She stormed out of the vault, stepping on a diagram for a Federal Reserve vault door as she left. Darnell followed her, casting one last look of hatred at me before disappearing up the stairs. I was alone in the blue glow of the server room. I knelt down and finished gathering the papers. I organized them carefully, putting them back into the folder. Becky thought she had just won. She thought she had confirmed that I was destitute. She thought the house was the only asset left to squeeze. She didn't know that she had just handled the evidence that proved I was not only sane, but a genius. And she didn't know that the folder I was holding was going to be the centerpiece of the lawsuit Marcus was preparing. I stood up, clutching the folder. They wanted me to go to the title company. They wanted me to sign. Good. I was ready to sign. I tucked the folder inside my jacket, buttoning it tight. I walked out of the vault, leaving the door open. It didn't matter anymore. The secret was out, and they had rejected it. I climbed the stairs, my cane hitting each step with a heavy thud. I was going to my execution, or so they thought. But as I walked into the kitchen where Becky was frantically calling the real estate agent to confirm the appointment, I allowed myself a small, invisible smile. They called me a broke old man. They called me worthless. They were about to find out exactly what a worthless old man could do with a pen, a lawyer, and a folder full of trash. The van from Shady Pines pulled away from the curb, empty. But the hearse for Darnell's future was just pulling up. It was time to finish this. The ride to the title company was silent as a funeral procession. Darnell drove his leased BMW with white-knuckled intensity, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, as if he expected the loan sharks to pull us over before we reached the closing table. Becky sat in the passenger seat, applying a fresh coat of lipstick, her thumb scrolling furiously on her phone, probably adding items to an online cart she intended to check out the second the wire hit. I sat in the back, my cane resting against my knee, the folder of patents buttoned securely inside my jacket. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was a senile old man they had bullied into submission. They didn't know I was the one driving the car. They were just holding the steering wheel while I cut the brake lines. We pulled up to a glass and steel building downtown. Apex Development had rented a conference room on the 42nd floor overlooking the city I had helped build. Sterling was already there, sitting at the head of a mahogany table that looked long enough to land a plane on. He looked impatient, tapping a gold pen against a stack of legal documents. Beside him sat a notary, a woman with severe glasses and a stamp that held the power to change lives. And in the corner stood Evans, the engineer, looking at me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. "Sorry we are late, Sterling," Darnell said, rushing into the room, his sweat staining the collar of his suit. Traffic was a nightmare. "But we are here. Dad is here." He wheeled me into the room, positioning me at the foot of the table like a prop. I looked at Sterling. I looked at the view of the lake. I looked at the documents waiting for my signature. This was the kill zone. Sterling didn't waste time with pleasantries. He was a man who smelled blood in the water. He knew Darnell was desperate. He knew about the foundation rumors I had started. "We have adjusted the contract," Sterling said, sliding the papers across the polished wood. "Due to the potential structural issues raised by Mr. Blackwood at lunch, we are holding back $400,000 in escrow for 6 months until a full subterranean survey is completed. The purchase price is $2 million flat, closing today. Take it or leave it." Darnell looked like he had been punched in the gut. $400,000 was a lot of money to leave on the table. But he did the math in his head. He owed $500,000 to the sharks. $2 million was still enough to pay them off, buy a new life, and put me in a hole. "We will take it," Darnell said, his voice cracking slightly. "Where do we sign?" Sterling pointed to the line at the bottom of the deed. "Right there. But your father has to sign first. He is the title holder." All eyes turned to me. The room went dead silent. This was the moment. Becky leaned down, her breath hot in my ear. "Sign it, Cy," she whispered, her voice a razor blade wrapped in silk. "Do not embarrass us. Do not hesitate. Just write your name and we will take you to get ice cream." Like I was a toddler. Like I was a dog. Darnell placed the pen in my hand. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen, the kind that flows like liquid. "Please, Dad," he murmured. "Just sign." I looked at the pen. I looked at the paper. It was a warranty deed transferring ownership of the property at 4200 Oak Street from Cyrus Blackwood to Apex Development Group. By signing this, I was legally stating that I had the right to sell this property. But I didn't. The property belonged to the Protocol Omega Trust, I was only the trustee living there on a life estate. Signing this document as an individual owner was fraud. It was a felony. And Darnell, as the one orchestrating the sale and receiving the funds, was the principal beneficiary of that fraud. I wasn't just signing away a house, I was signing an indictment. I gripped the pen. My hand did not shake. The tremor I had faked for the last week vanished. I sat up straighter in the wheelchair. I looked Darnell right in the eye, and for a second he looked confused by the clarity in my gaze. Then I looked at the paper. I pressed the nib to the page. The ink flowed black and permanent. I didn't scrawl a weak, shaky line. I wrote with the precision of a draftsman. I signed my name, but not just my name. I signed the name I used on every major blueprint in the 90s. The name that was known in the industry. The name that was on the patent documents hidden in my jacket. Cyrus, the architect. The notary frowned, adjusting her glasses. "Sir, you added a title," she said. "It just needs to be your legal name." I looked at her. "That is who I am," I said, my voice deep and resonant, filling the room. "I built this city. I am the architect, and I stand by my work." Darnell panicked, sensing the deal wobbling. "It is fine," he blurted out. "That is how he signs everything. It is his legal alias. Just stamp it, please." Sterling looked at the signature, then at me. He shrugged. "As long as the title insurance clears, I do not care if he signs it Santa Claus." The notary hesitated, then stamped the document. Thump. It was done. The trap was sprung. Becky let out a breath she had been holding for 10 minutes. She grabbed my shoulder, squeezing it in triumph. "Good boy, Cy," she whispered. "You did good." Darnell signed his name next as the witness and beneficiary. He was practically vibrating. Sterling signed. Then he pulled out his phone. "Wire transfer is initiated," he said, tapping the screen. "It should hit your account in minutes." We sat there in silence, watching Darnell's phone, which lay face up on the table. 1 minute, 2 minutes. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I watched my son. I watched the greed eating him alive. He wasn't thinking about me. He wasn't thinking about the house he grew up in. He was thinking about his own salvation, bought with my blood. Ding. The notification sound was loud in the quiet room. Darnell grabbed the phone. His eyes went wide. He let out a whoop of pure joy that sounded obscene in the professional setting. "It is there," he shouted, showing the screen to Becky. $2 million. Pending balance cleared. Available funds, $2 million. Becky squealed and hugged him, jumping up and down. "We are rich," she screamed, ignoring Sterling and the notary who were watching them with distaste. "We did it, baby. We actually did it." Darnell didn't wait. He didn't even leave the room. His fingers flew across the screen. "Paying Sal right now," he muttered, his face manic. 500,000. Sent. Done. I am free. He looked up at the ceiling, laughing like a maniac. "I am free. No more threats. No more looking over my shoulder." Becky pulled out her own phone. "I am putting the deposit on the G-Wagon," she announced, "and booking the trip to the Maldives. First class. We deserve this, Darnell. After everything we put up with, we deserve this." They were spending it. They were draining the account right there in front of the man they had robbed. They didn't even look at me. I was invisible again, a discarded husk. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Congratulations," he said dryly. "My team will be at the property at 8 a.m. tomorrow to change the locks and begin the assessment for demolition." "I want the house vacant." "Vacant," Darnell said, looking up from his phone, his smile faltering slightly. "Tomorrow. But we need time to move Dad's stuff." "The agreement was vacant possession immediately," Sterling said coldly. "Anything left inside becomes the property of Apex Development. You have until 8 a.m. Sterling walked out, followed by his team. The room felt suddenly empty despite the $2 million floating in the air. Darnell turned to me. His smile returned wider and more arrogant than ever. He walked over and patted me on the cheek, a gesture of total disrespect. "Did you hear that, Dad?" he said. "You have to be out by 8. But don't worry. We booked you a room at the Motel 6 down by the highway for tonight. Tomorrow, the state van will pick you up." "Motel 6. Becky laughed, scrolling through a luxury resort website. "That is generous, babe. I would have left him at the bus stop." She looked at me, her eyes shining with malice. "You see, Cy, you tried to fight us. You tried to lock the door. You tried to scare the buyers. But we won. We have the money. We have the power. And you are just a broke old man with a cane." I looked at them. I looked at the transaction history on Darnell's phone screen, which was still glowing on the table. Transfer complete $500,000 to Sal V. Transfer complete $20,000 to Mercedes-Benz of Chicago. They had already spent over $500,000 of money that wasn't theirs. Money obtained through fraud. I gripped my cane and slowly pushed myself up from the wheelchair. I stood to my full height, straightening my spine, ignoring the pain in my leg. I didn't look frail anymore. I looked like a structure that had weathered a hurricane and remained standing. "Are we going?" Darnell asked, annoyed that I was standing. "Sit down. I will wheel you out. I do not need the chair," I said, my voice clear and strong. "And I do not need the motel." Darnell frowned, confused by the change in my demeanor. "What are you talking about? You have nowhere to go." "I have plenty of places to go," I said, buttoning my jacket over the patent folder. "But before I go, I want to thank you." "Thank me," he scoffed. "For what? Putting you in a home." "No," I said, smiling a cold, hard smile. "For signing that paper. For accepting the money. For spending it so quickly. You just made the lawyer's job very easy." Becky stopped scrolling. She looked up, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What lawyer?" she asked sharply. Just then, Darnell's phone rang. It wasn't a notification. It was a call. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered it, putting it on speaker, probably thinking it was the car dealership confirming the deposit. "Hello, Mr. Blackwood." "Who is this?" Darnell asked. "This is Sarah Jenkins from the City Planning and Zoning Commission," the voice on the line said, crisp and official. "We just received a notification of a title transfer for 4200 Oak Street. Yeah, I just sold it," Darnell bragged. "For $2 million. "There is a problem, Mr. Blackwood," the woman said. "That property is flagged. It is part of a federal eminent domain seizure authorized 5 years ago for the Interstate Expansion Project. The previous owner, Cyrus Blackwood, signed the compensation agreement in 2019. He has been leasing it back from the state for $1 a year." Darnell's face went slack. "What? That is impossible. My dad owns it." "No, sir," the woman continued, her voice turning stern. "The state owns it. And you just sold state property to a private developer for $2 million. That is a felony, Mr. Blackwood. We are freezing the funds and notifying the authorities. Have a nice day." Click. The silence in the room was absolute. Darnell dropped the phone. It hit the table with a crack. He looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. Becky looked like she was going to be sick. You sold it," Darnell whispered. "5 years ago." I nodded, adjusting my cuffs. "I knew they were coming for the land," I said. "So I made a deal. They paid me well. I put the money in a trust. I just lived there to keep the lights on." "But you signed the deed." Becky screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "You signed it, Cyrus the architect." "That is right," I said calmly. "And you two just committed grand larceny, real estate fraud, and wire fraud. And since you already spent $500,000 of the state's money, I imagine you are going to have a very hard time paying it back." I turned and walked toward the door, my cane tapping a victory march on the floor. Darnell fell into the chair, clutching his chest, gasping for air. Becky stared at her phone, watching the banking app turn red as the freeze took hold. I stopped at the door and looked back. "Oh, and Darnell," I said. "Sal the loan shark. He doesn't like it when the police freeze his payments. You might want to run." I walked out of the conference room, leaving them in the ruins of their own greed. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside. Going down, the digital voice said, "Yes," I thought. "They certainly are. But me, I was just getting started." The shark was waiting in the lobby, and he looked hungry. The silence in the conference room was broken only by the heavy breathing of two people who thought they had just won the lottery. Darnell was staring at his phone screen, his eyes glossed over with the kind of euphoria you usually only see in junkies after a fix. He had just wired $500,000 to a violent criminal named Sal, and he still had $1.5 million left in the account. He felt invincible. Becky was already on a car dealership website picking out the leather interior for a G-Wagon she hadn't even test-driven yet. They were drunk on it. Drunk on the zeros. Drunk on the idea that they had outsmarted the old man in the corner. Mr. Sterling, the developer, was packing his briefcase, his movements sharp and efficient. He had gotten the land for a steal or so, he thought. He snapped his leather case shut and stood up, extending a hand to Darnell. "Pleasure doing business," Mr. Blackwood Sterling said, his voice devoid of warmth. "We will have the demolition crew on site at 0800 hours tomorrow. Make sure the property is vacant." Darnell grabbed his hand, shaking it vigorously. Absolutely, Mr. Sterling. The place will be empty. Dad is going to a hotel tonight, right? Dad? He didn't even look at me when he said it. I was just logistics now. A box to be moved. I stood by the window looking out at the Chicago skyline. I didn't answer him. I was counting seconds. 1, 2, 3. And then it happened. The phone in Sterling's inside jacket pocket began to ring. It wasn't a normal ringtone. It was a jarring, urgent siren sound that he evidently assigned only to his legal team. Sterling frowned, checking the caller ID. He held up a finger, silencing Darnell, who was midway through a brag about his investment strategies. "One moment," Sterling said. He answered the phone, pressing it to his ear. "Sterling here. We just closed. The wire is sent." I watched Sterling's face. It went from professional indifference to confusion, and then to a shade of red that looked dangerous. "What do you mean, flagged?" He barked into the phone. "We ran the title. It was clear." Darnell stopped smiling. He looked at Becky. Becky lowered her phone, the G-Wagon forgotten. The air in the room shifted instantly. The celebration was over. The interrogation was beginning. Sterling listened for another 10 seconds, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the phone. "Are you telling me I just wired $2 million for a property that doesn't exist?" he roared. Darnell stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Mr. Sterling, is there a problem?" Sterling ignored him. He was listening intently to the voice on the other end. Then he looked at me. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were burning. He looked at me with a mixture of shock and fury. He put the phone on speaker and slammed it onto the mahogany table. "Say that again," he ordered his lawyer, loud enough for everyone to hear. A woman's voice, tinny and sharp, filled the room. "Mr. Sterling, we just got a ping from the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. The title transfer has been rejected." "Rejected?" Darnell squeaked. "Why?" "I signed it. Dad signed it." "Because the parcel at 4200 Oak Street is not private property," the lawyer continued. "It is government land. It was seized under eminent domain 5 years ago for the I-290 expansion project. The previous owner, Cyrus Blackwood, signed a full liquidation settlement in 2019. He does not own the house. He is a tenant leasing it from the Department of Transportation pending demolition." The room spun. Or at least it must have spun for Darnell because he grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. Becky let out a sound like a balloon losing air. Sterling looked at Darnell, his voice low and terrifying. "You sold me a highway, Darnell. You just sold me a piece of federal infrastructure." "No," Darnell stammered, sweat popping out on his forehead like bullets. "That is a lie. My dad has lived there for 40 years. He owns it. He signed the deed. Look at the deed." Sterling snatched up the deed I had just signed. He looked at the signature. "Cyrus, the architect." He looked at me. I was leaning on my cane, calm as a frozen lake. "Mr. Blackwood," Sterling said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Is this true? Did you sell this house to the state 5 years ago?" I nodded slowly. I tried to tell him, I said, pointing my chin at Darnell. "At lunch. I told him the house was sinking. I told him it was built on a swamp of bad decisions. He didn't listen. He just kicked me under the table." "You liar," Darnell screamed, lunging toward me. "You told me it was yours. You let me sign." "I didn't let you do anything," I said, my voice hardening. "You forced me. You forged a power of attorney. You threatened to put me in an asylum. You brought me here against my will. And you put a pen in my hand. I signed what you told me to sign. But you cannot transfer a title you do not have, son." Becky stood up, knocking her chair over. "But the money," she shrieked. "The wire went through. We have the $2 million. It is in the account." Sterling turned to her, his face a mask of predatory anger. "Not for long. I am reversing the wire. I am calling the fraud department right now. We will freeze that account before you can buy a stick of gum." Darnell made a noise that sounded like a dying animal. "No," he gasped, grabbing Sterling's arm. "You cannot. Please. You do not understand. I already spent it." The room went deadly silent again. Sterling slowly pulled his arm out of Darnell's grip as if Darnell were contagious. "Excuse me," Sterling said very quietly. "The money hit the account 5 minutes ago." "What do you mean you spent it?" "I had debts," Darnell whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Bad debts. I wired $500,000 to a creditor immediately. It is gone. I cannot get it back. Sterling stared at him. $500,000. Of my money. Of my company's money. You embezzled $500,000 in 5 minutes. It wasn't embezzlement, Darnell pleaded. It was a sale. I thought I owned it. It was a mistake. It was not a mistake, Sterling roared, slamming his fist on the table. It is wire fraud. It is grand larceny. It is selling federal property under false pretenses. He turned to the notary, who was frantically packing up her stamp, looking terrified. You saw this. You witnessed him coerce this man. You witnessed him claim ownership. The notary nodded vigorously. I saw it all. He said he was the beneficiary. He said his father was incompetent. Sterling pulled out his phone again. I am calling the district attorney, he said. And then I am calling the FBI. Because theft over $1 million across state lines involving federal property is not just a lawsuit, Darnell. It is 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Becky screamed. She actually screamed a high-pitched wail of pure selfish terror. She grabbed Darnell by the lapels of his jacket and started shaking him. Fix this, she yelled. Fix this, you idiot. You told me he owned it. You told me we were rich. You put my name on the account, Darnell. If they arrest you, they arrest me too. Darnell pushed her away, his eyes wild. He looked at Sterling, then at the door, then at me. Dad, he begged, dropping to his knees right there on the plush carpet of the conference room. Dad, please, tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you forgot you sold it. You have money, Dad. I know you do. Pay him back. Give him the $500,000. Save me, please. I looked down at my son. He was on his knees begging for his life just like he had been an hour ago. But an hour ago he was begging me to help him commit a crime. Now he was begging me to pay for it. I looked at him and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a profound sense of completion. The circle was closed. I do not have $500,000, Darnell, I said, my voice cool and detached. I am just a broke old man, remember? A hoarder with a basement full of junk. Besides, I tried to save you. I offered you the basement. I told you to take the papers and leave the house alone, but you were too greedy. You wanted the cash. Well, now you have the cash, and you have the consequences. Sterling was already talking on the phone, giving Darnell's name and social security number to someone on the other end. Block the exits, Sterling said into the phone. Do not let them leave the building. I have security on the way up. Darnell scrambled backward, crab walking away from Sterling until he hit the wall. Becky was hyperventilating, clutching her designer purse like it was an oxygen tank. They were trapped in a glass tower with no way out and the walls closing in. I adjusted my cap. I didn't need to see the rest. I knew what happened next. The police would arrive. The accounts would be frozen. Sal the loan shark would realize his payment was being clawed back by the bank, and he would be very unhappy. Darnell was about to enter a world of pain that I couldn't protect him from even if I wanted to. And I didn't want to. I turned to Sterling. Mr. Sterling, I said, I apologize for the inconvenience. My son is not well. He has delusions of grandeur. I will see myself out. Sterling looked at me. He was furious, but he was a businessman. He recognized that I wasn't the enemy. I was just the bait. Go home, Mr. Blackwood, he said gruffly, and get a better lawyer. You are going to need one for the witness stand. I already have the best lawyer in Chicago, I said. I walked to the elevator. The doors opened with a soft ding. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I saw Darnell lunging for the window, pressing his face against the glass, looking down at the street 42 stories below. He was looking for a way out. But there were no exits in this room, only the one I had just walked through. The elevator descended smoothly. My ears popped. I felt lighter. The weight of the house, the weight of the secret, the weight of my son's failure, it was all gone. I was homeless, technically. My house belonged to the state and was scheduled for demolition. I had no furniture, my clothes were in a trash bag, but I had never felt richer. Because in my pocket, buttoned against my chest, was the folder. And in the lobby waiting for me was Marcus Vance, the shark. And he had the rest of the plan in his briefcase. I walked out of the elevator into the marble lobby. Marcus was sitting on a leather bench reading a newspaper. He saw me and stood up, smoothing his $5,000 suit. He looked at my face and smiled a sharkish smile full of teeth and knowing. Done, he asked. Done, I said. He signed. He took the money. He spent the money. And then the call came. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. You are a cold bastard, Si. He is going to prison for a long time. He earned every day of it, I said. Did you bring the papers? Marcus tapped his briefcase. Project X is ready to launch. The patents are secured. The royalty accounts are unlocked. And I have a temporary housing solution set up for you. Penthouse or hotel? Penthouse, I said. I am tired of hotels. And Marcus. Yeah. I want to stop by the storage unit first. I need to make sure the basement was cleared out properly. I want my drawings. Marcus nodded, opening the door for me. The car is waiting. We walked out into the Chicago afternoon. The sun was shining. The air was crisp. Somewhere 42 floors above me, my son was being handcuffed. Somewhere across town, a loan shark was realizing he had been stiffed. And somewhere in a federal database, a red flag was popping up next to the name Darnell Blackwood. I took a deep breath. It was the smell of freedom. I got into the back of Marcus S. Bentley. To the storage unit, I said. And then to the bank. I have a check to deposit. And this time I am not using the ATM. I thought I was done with the 42nd floor, but the universe has a funny way of demanding an encore when the villain is still twitching. I was standing in the marble lobby adjusting my cap, ready to walk out into the fresh air of freedom, when Marcus Vance stepped in front of me. He checked his diamond-encrusted watch and flashed a smile that was all teeth and zero warmth. "We are not leaving yet, Cy," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "The show has a second act and you have the front row seat." Behind him, 2 uniformed officers from the Economic Crimes Unit and a man in a plain suit who screamed federal agent were waiting by the elevator bank. "Why go back, Marcus?" I asked, leaning on my cane. I dropped the bomb. The building is already crumbling. Because Marcus said, steering me back toward the elevators. "We need to make sure the rubble buries them completely. Plus, I want to see the look on your son's face when I play the mixtape." He patted the leather briefcase at his side. I felt a cold flicker of anticipation. I had almost forgotten about the burner phone in the cereal box. I had almost forgotten that while I was playing the senile old man eating bran flakes, I was recording every threat, every insult, and every admission of guilt. We rode the elevator back up in silence, the tension in the metal box thick enough to cut. When the doors opened on the 42nd floor, we could hear the screaming from the conference room all the way down the hall. Darnell was hysterical, his voice cracking as he tried to bargain with a man who held all the cards. "I will pay you back, Mr. Sterling," he was shouting. "Just give me a week. I have investments. I have assets." "You have nothing," Sterling roared back. "You have debt and you have a pair of handcuffs waiting for you." Marcus didn't knock. He didn't announce himself. He simply pushed the double glass doors open and strode into the room like he owned the building, the skyline, and the air everyone was breathing. The police officers flanked him, creating a wall of blue authority. The room fell silent instantly. Darnell spun around his face, a mask of sweat and tears. When he saw me standing next to Marcus, his eyes bulged. "Dad," he gasped. "Dad, help me. Tell them. Tell them I didn't know." Marcus stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the table right on top of the fraudulent deed. He looked at Darnell with the kind of disdain a lion reserves for a sick gazelle. "Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "I am Marcus Vance, attorney at law, representing Cyrus Blackwood and the Protocol Omega Trust." Becky let out a squeak. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. If Marcus Vance showed up, it meant you weren't just getting sued, you were getting erased. "What is this?" Darnell stammered. "Who called a lawyer?" "Your father did," Marcus said. "About 10 years ago when he set up the trust that owns the house you just tried to sell. And again 3 days ago when you broke into his home." Darnell looked at me, betrayal written all over his face, as if I were the one who had wronged him. "You set me up," he whispered. "You let me sign." Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "We didn't set you up, son. We just handed you the rope. You are the one who tied the noose." Sterling stepped forward, looking at Marcus with professional respect. "Mr. Vance, I presume you are here to clear up this mess. This man has defrauded my company of $2 million. I am here to clarify the nature of the crime," Marcus corrected. "You see, Mr. Sterling, this isn't just real estate fraud. This is elder abuse, extortion, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." Darnell shook his head vigorously. "No, no, no." He signed willingly. "Look at the signature. He wanted to sell. He wants to move to a home. Tell them, Dad. Tell them you wanted this." I said nothing. I just leaned on my cane and watched. Marcus opened his briefcase. He pulled out a small black device. It wasn't the burner phone itself, but a high-fidelity speaker. He connected it to his tablet. "Your father didn't want anything," Marcus said. "He was coerced. He was threatened with physical harm and false imprisonment. And unlike you, Darnell, we have receipts." That is a lie, Becky shrieked, finding her voice. It is his word against ours. He is senile. Nobody will believe him. Marcus tapped the screen of his tablet. Play track 4, he said softly. The speaker crackled to life. The sound quality was crystal clear. It was the audio I had recorded in the kitchen the morning of the cereal box incident. Darnell's voice filled the room loud and angry. Just do it, Dad. Sit in the wheelchair. We do not want you falling while we have guests. Then Becky's voice shrill and cruel. If you mess this up, Cy, I swear I will put you in a state facility so bad you will beg for death. The color drained from Becky's face so fast she looked like a ghost. The notary gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Sterling looked at Darnell with pure disgust. Marcus tapped the screen again. Track 7. This was from the basement the night they brought the safecracker. Open the door right now tonight and show us the money. Or tomorrow morning at sunrise, the van from Shady Pines comes to pick you up. And they do not use wheelchairs, Cy. They use straitjackets. The recording ended, leaving a silence so profound you could hear the traffic from 42 stories down. Marcus looked at the police officers. Officers that sounds like a credible threat of kidnapping and false imprisonment to me. Coercion of a vulnerable adult to sign legal documents under duress. The older officer nodded, his hand resting on his handcuffs. It certainly does, Counselor. Darnell backed away until his legs hit the window. It was a joke, he babbled. We were just trying to motivate him. We wouldn't really have done it. You called the van, Marcus said, holding up a printout. I have the intake logs from Shady Pines. You booked a bed, you paid a deposit. You were going to lock him away the second the ink was dry. Darnell looked at me. His eyes were pleading, but there was no love in them, only fear. Dad, please, stop him. I am your son. I stepped forward, taking one step closer to the table. No, I said, my voice steady. You are not my son. My son died a long time ago. You are just a man who owes a lot of money to a lot of bad people. And speaking of money, Marcus pulled out his phone. He held it up so Darnell could see the screen. It was a banking alert. I took the liberty of contacting the fraud department at First National 10 minutes ago, Marcus said. Given the evidence of coercion and the federal nature of the property theft, they have initiated an immediate freeze on the transaction. Darnell checked his own phone, frantically tapping the screen. His banking app opened. The balance that had said $1.5 million a few minutes ago was now flashing red. Account frozen. Contact branch. Pending reversal, $2 million. No. Darnell screamed. No, no, no. You cannot. I already spent it. The bank doesn't care, Marcus said, cold as ice. They are clawing back the full amount. The $2 million you received is being returned to Apex Development right now. But I sent $500,000. Darnell cried, grabbing his hair. I sent it to Sal. It is gone. The bank will put your account in the negative, Marcus explained, as if he were teaching a slow child basic math. You will owe the bank $500,000, plus overdraft fees, plus legal fees. And Mr. Sterling here is going to sue you for breach of contract and damages, which brings me to the penalty clause. Sterling stepped in his face, grim. The contract you signed, Darnell, has a fraud penalty of 20%. That is another $400,000 you owe me personally for wasting my time and dragging my company into a felony. Let us do the math, Marcus said. You owe the bank $500,000. You owe Sterling $400,000. You owe the loan shark nothing because you paid him. But I have a feeling when the FBI investigates that payment, they are going to seize it from him as proceeds of a crime. So Sal is going to come looking for his money again. Darnell sank to the floor. He was doing the math too. He was nearly $1 million in the hole with no assets, no house, and the police standing 5 feet away. Becky tried to edge toward the door. She was trying to slip away to distance herself from the sinking ship. Excuse me, she muttered. I need to use the restroom. Officer, the federal agent said, stepping in front of her. Stay right there, Mrs. Blackwood. We have you on the recordings too. Conspiracy is a charge that sticks to both of you. Becky turned on Darnell instantly.
He made me do it,
she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at her husband. He told me it was his house. He told me his father was crazy. I just wanted to help. I am a victim here. I watched them turn on each other. It was inevitable. Rats always eat each other when the ship goes down. Darnell looked up at her. His face twisted in betrayal. You wanted the G-Wagon, he shouted. You called the asylum. You threw his paintings in the trash. It was your idea to break the lock. "Gentlemen," Marcus said, addressing the police. "I think you have heard enough to establish probable cause." The officers moved in. Darnell didn't fight. He didn't have the strength left. He let them pull his arms behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. "Dad," he sobbed as they tightened the metal around his wrists. "Dad, do not let them take me. Sal will kill me in prison. He has guys on the inside." I leaned on my cane and looked at him. "Then you better hope they put you in solitary," I said, "because I cannot help you, Darnell. I am just a broke old man, remember?" Becky fought. She scratched at the officer trying to cuff her, screaming obscenities, blaming everyone but herself. They dragged her out, kicking and screaming her heels, leaving black marks on the carpet. Darnell hung his head as they led him past me. He stopped for a second, looking at my shoes. "I am sorry," he whispered. I looked at the top of his head. I wondered if he meant it. I wondered if the fear of death had finally squeezed a drop of truth out of him. "It doesn't matter," I said. "It is too late." They took him away. The elevator doors closed, cutting off his sobbing. The room was quiet again. Sterling walked over to the window and looked out. He looked shaken. "Mr. Blackwood," he said without turning around. I had no idea. "I know," I said. "He fooled us both." Sterling turned back to me. "I am dropping the lawsuit against you personally. But your son, I am going to bury him." "Do what you have to do," I said. Marcus closed his briefcase. The audio file was safe. The deed was void. The money was frozen. It was a clean sweep. "Come on, Si," Marcus said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Let us get out of here. The air in here smells like greed." I nodded. I felt tired, bone-deep tired, but I also felt light. The tumor had been removed. The surgery was painful, but the patient was going to survive. We walked to the elevator. I didn't look back at the conference room. There was nothing there for me anymore, just the ghosts of a future my son had thrown away. We stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, sealing off the scene of the crime. Marcus loosened his tie. "That was brutal," he said. "Necessary," I corrected. "Where to now?" "Storage unit," Marcus reminded me. "You wanted to check the files." "Right," I said. "The storage unit." Because even though the war was won, there was still one loose end. Becky. She had screamed that Darnell made her do it. She was trying to play the victim card. But I knew something Darnell didn't. I knew about the camera in the basement ceiling, the one that pointed directly at the workbench, and I knew exactly what it had recorded while Darnell was upstairs sleeping and Becky was down there alone with a bottle of pills and my tea. Darnell was a thief. But Becky was something much worse. And I had the video to prove it. "To the storage unit," I said. "I have one more nail to hammer into this coffin." We walked out of the elevator and into the chaos of the street. The revolving doors of the office building spun like a centrifuge, spitting out the wreckage of my family onto the sidewalk. Police cruisers had curbed their tires against the concrete, their lights flashing in a silent rhythm that drew a crowd of onlookers. Darnell was already in the back of a squad car, his face pressed against the window, looking like a child who had been left behind at school. But Becky was putting on a performance that deserved an Academy Award. She was standing by the open door of another cruiser, refusing to get in, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She had grabbed the lapels of a young officer, shaking him, begging him to listen. "I am a victim!" she screamed, her voice shrill enough to shatter glass. "He forced me to do it. Darnell made me. I didn't know about the forgery. I didn't know about the trust. I am just the daughter-in-law." I stood on the steps of the building, leaning on my cane, watching her throw her husband under the bus without a second of hesitation. It was pathetic, but it was also dangerous. Becky was manipulative enough to make a jury doubt. She was pretty enough to play the naive wife caught in her husband's schemes. If she spun this right, she might walk away with a probation sentence while Darnell rotted in a cell. I couldn't let that happen. Darnell was a thief, but Becky was a predator. And predators do not stop hunting just because they get caught in a net. They just chew through the ropes. Marcus stepped up beside me, his eyes locked on Becky. "She is good," he murmured. "Look at the officer. He is softening. He is listening." I saw it too. The young cop was loosening his grip on her arm, nodding slightly. He was buying the narrative of the coerced wife. "Not for long," I said, reaching into the inner pocket of my jacket. My fingers closed around the small, cold rectangle of the USB drive I had retrieved from the server room. It was the backup. The insurance policy I hoped I would never have to use because using it meant acknowledging a darkness in my family that I didn't want to see. but the time for blindness was over. "Officer," I called out, my voice booming over the noise of the traffic. "Before you process Mrs. Blackwood, I have evidence you need to see." Becky's head snapped toward me. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time the tears stopped instantly. The mask slipped, and I saw the pure, unadulterated hate underneath. "Shut up, old man," she hissed, lunging toward me before the cop pulled her back. "Do not listen to him. He is senile. He is vindictive. He hates me because I am white. He has always hated me." She was playing every card in the deck race age victimhood. Marcus stepped forward, holding up a hand to silence her. "Officer, my client is not senile, and this evidence is not about the fraud. It is about something much darker." The officer frowned, looking from Becky to Marcus. "What are you talking about, counselor?" I walked down the steps slowly, making sure Becky watched every inch of my progress. I held up the USB drive. "I have a security system in my basement," I said. "High definition. Audio and video. Motion activated." Becky's face went the color of a sheet. She remembered the basement. She remembered being down there alone while Darnell was upstairs sleeping. But she didn't know the cameras were rolling. She thought she was alone in the dark. Marcus took the drive from my hand. He pulled a tablet out of his briefcase and plugged the drive in. He tapped the screen, bringing up the video file dated 2 nights ago. He turned the volume up to max and held the screen so the officer and Becky could see it. The video was grainy but clear enough. It showed the workbench in my basement. It showed Becky standing there holding a steaming mug of tea, my tea. She looked over her shoulder, checking the stairs. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. I knew that bottle. It was Darnell's old prescription for oxycodone leftover from his knee surgery 2 years ago. On the screen, Becky unscrewed the cap and shook 3 pills into her hand. She didn't just drop them in. She used the handle of a screwdriver to crush them into a fine powder on the workbench. Then she scraped the powder into my tea and stirred it with a dirty pen. The audio on the video crackled. "Drink up, Cy," she whispered to the empty room, her voice distorted but recognizable. "Go to sleep and don't wake up." Then she smiled a cold, dead smile and walked toward the stairs carrying the poisoned cup. The officer watched the video, his face hardening into stone. He looked at the screen where Becky was mixing a lethal cocktail. Then he looked at the woman standing in front of him. Becky wasn't screaming anymore. She was frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "That is not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice a whisper. It was aspirin. He had a headache. I was helping him." Marcus stepped in, closing the trap. "That was not aspirin, Mrs. Blackwood. We recovered the bottle from your purse during the initial search. And we have Mr. Blackwood's medical records. He has a heart condition, arrhythmia. Mixing high-dose opioids with his heart medication causes respiratory depression and cardiac arrest. 3 pills isn't a sleep aid. It is an overdose." He turned to the officer. "Officer, this goes beyond fraud. This is premeditated attempted murder. She tried to kill a key witness to prevent him from stopping the sale of the house." The officer didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed Becky's arm and spun her around, slamming her against the hood of the cruiser. He kicked her legs apart roughly. Becky gasped, the wind knocked out of her. "Rebecca Blackwood," the officer intoned, his voice flat and professional. "You are under arrest for elder abuse, distribution of a controlled substance, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." "No," Becky shrieked, struggling against the handcuffs. "No, you cannot do this." It was Darnell. "He told me to do it. He said the old man needed to go." Darnell was watching from the window of the other squad car. I could see him through the glass. He couldn't hear her words, but he could see her face. He could see his wife, the woman he had stolen, for the woman he had betrayed his father for trying to pin a murder charge on him to save her own skin. He slumped against the seat, closing his eyes. The betrayal was complete. Becky was still screaming as they shoved her into the back of the cruiser. Her face was pressed against the wire mesh, distorted and ugly. She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with a promise of violence, but I just looked back at her with pity. She had thrown away her freedom, her marriage, and her life for money she never earned. She had tried to kill me over a house she didn't own, and now she was going to a place where G-Wagons and vacations to the Maldives were just dreams you had before the cell door slammed shut. Officer Miller, the older cop, walked over to me. He tipped his hat, respectful now. "Mr. Blackwood, I owe you an apology," he said. "We should have listened to you the first night. You played this close to the vest." "I had to," I said. "If I had played my hand too early, they would have just run away. I needed them to sign. I needed them to commit." The officer nodded. "Well, they are committed now. Federal charges, state charges, they are going away for a long time. Do you need a ride somewhere, sir? I looked at Marcus. My lawyer has it covered, I said. The cruisers pulled away, sirens wailing, clearing a path through the afternoon traffic. I watched them go until they were just red specks in the distance. The adrenaline that had been fueling me for days began to fade, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. My leg throbbed. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the recoil of the weapon I had just fired. I had destroyed my family. I had sent my son and his wife to prison. It was a victory, yes, but it tasted like ash. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. You did what you had to do, Si. They made their choices. You just held up the mirror. I know, I said quietly, but it is still hard to look at the reflection. Marcus nodded, understanding. Come on, let us get you to the storage unit. You need to see that your life is safe. We got into the Bentley, the leather seats soft and welcoming. As we drove away from the scene of the crime, I looked out at the city. It was moving on. People were buying coffee, catching buses, living their lives. The world didn't care about the tragedy of the Blackwood family. But I cared. And I knew that I had to rebuild. Not just my assets, but my peace. We drove to the industrial park on the outskirts of town. The storage facility was a fortress of corrugated metal and security cameras. It was the one place Darnell had actually followed instructions. He had hired a crew to move everything from the basement before he went to the closing. He thought he was just clearing out junk to satisfy a senile old man. He didn't know he was preserving the only evidence of my genius. Marcus swiped his access card and the gate rolled open. We drove to Unit 4B. I got out my cane, clicking on the asphalt. I rolled up the metal door. The smell of dust and old paper hit me, and it was the sweetest perfume I had ever smelled. There they were, the filing cabinets, the drafting table, the server rack sitting in the corner unplugged but safe. My life's work, stacked in boxes piled on pallets. Darnell had dumped it all here haphazardly, but it was here. He hadn't burned it. He hadn't sold it. It was the one decent thing he had done in this entire mess, and he had only done it out of greed. I walked into the unit, running my hand over a stack of blueprints. These were the designs for the Federal Reserve Vault in St. Louis. These were the schematics for the panic room in the governor's mansion. Becky had called this trash. She had thrown it at me. She had tried to trade it for freedom. I pulled a folder from a box. It contained the original patent for a biometric locking mechanism that was currently being used in 3,000 ATMs across the country. I held it up to the light. This piece of paper was worth more than the house they tried to sell. It was worth more than the debt Darnell owed. If they had just asked, if they had just come to me with honesty instead of crowbars and lies, I would have helped them. I would have licensed a patent. I would have paid off the debt. I would have saved them. But they chose the crowbar. They chose the poison. I placed the folder back in the box. Marcus watched me from the doorway. Is it all there? He asked. It is all there, I said. Good, Marcus said. Because I have a meeting set up for you tomorrow. With whom? With Tech Core Systems. Marcus said, smiling. They heard rumors that the famous architect might be coming out of retirement. They want to buy the patent portfolio. $5 million opening offer. $5 million. I looked around the dusty storage unit. $5 million for the junk Darnell was so desperate to get rid of. The irony was sharp enough to cut glass. Tell them I am interested, I said. But the price is $6, and I want a consulting contract. I am not ready to retire, Marcus. I am just getting started. Marcus laughed. Done. Now let us get you to the penthouse. You need a shower and a drink. I locked the storage unit, securing my legacy behind a padlock that I picked myself. We got back in the car. But as we drove toward the city, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a picture of a shattered kneecap, and a message. Your son owes me. He is in jail. You are not. Pay up or I finish the job. It was Sal. The shark hadn't been fed, and now he was looking for a new source of meat. I showed the phone to Marcus. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. Looks like the loose ends are trying to tie themselves, he said. Do you want me to handle it? No, I said, deleting the message. Darnell brought this storm down. But I am not going to let it rain on me. Take me to the penthouse, Marcus. I have one more trap to set, and this one isn't for family. It is for the parasites they brought home. The penthouse Marcus had secured for me was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking Lake Michigan. It was quiet up here, far removed from the noise of the street and the chaos of the last few days. I stood on the balcony, leaning on the railing, feeling the cold wind off the water hit my face. I had $50 million in pending contracts sitting on the coffee table inside. I had my freedom. I had my dignity. But as I looked down at the tiny ants crawling along the sidewalk 40 stories below, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like a man waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then the buzzer rang. It was the doorman. "Mr. Blackwood, there is a man here to see you," he said, his voice professional but wary. "He says he is your son. Well, sir, he looks like he has been through a war." "Send him up," I said. I walked back into the living room and sat down in a high-backed leather armchair facing the door. I placed my cane across my knees. I waited. When the elevator door slid open, I almost didn't recognize him. Darnell was wearing the same suit he had worn to the signing, but it was ruined. The jacket was torn at the shoulder, stained with sweat and grime. He had lost his tie. His face was a map of misery gray skin, dark hollow eyes, and a fresh purple bruise blossoming on his cheekbone. He limped into the room, bringing the smell of the holding cell and fear with him. He stopped in the middle of the expensive Persian rug, looking around at the luxury surrounding me. His eyes landed on the bottle of scotch on the sidebar, then on the stack of contracts, and finally on me. "You did this," he whispered, his voice raspy. "You did this to me. I didn't move. I didn't offer him a drink. I didn't ask him to sit. I did nothing. Darnell," I said calmly, "I just stopped catching you when you jumped." He laughed, a broken, jagged sound. "They let me out on bail," he said. 10% of $100,000. I had to call Vinny. I had to borrow more money just to get out of the cage you put me in. And now Sal knows I am out." He walked closer, his hands twitching by his sides. "Sal sent a guy to meet me at the jail gates, Dad. That is where I got this." He touched the bruise on his face, wincing. "It was a message. He said the wire transfer was reversed. He said the bank took the money back. He says I stole from him." I watched him unravel. He wasn't angry anymore, he was terrified. He was a child who had broken a window and was realizing for the first time that the glass couldn't be put back together. "So what do you want, Darnell?" I asked. "Money," he blurted out, falling to his knees. "I need money, Dad. I know you have it. Marcus told my lawyer you sold the patents. $5 million. Just give me $500,000. That is all I need. I pay Sal. I pay Vinny, and I disappear. Please. They are going to kill me." He crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my trousers. His grip was weak, desperate. "Dad, please. I am your son. You cannot let them kill me." I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head, the thinning hair, the trembling shoulders. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike when he was 6. I remembered him falling, scraping his knee, and looking up at me, waiting for me to fix it. And I always did. I fixed the bike. I fixed his grades. I fixed his first car wreck. I fixed his credit score. I had spent 35 years fixing him, and in the process, I had broken him. I had turned him into a man who thought consequences were things that happened to other people. I reached into my pocket. Darnell's eyes lit up. He thought I was reaching for a checkbook. He thought I was reaching for salvation. Instead, I pulled out a plain white envelope. It was thick, but not thick enough to hold cash. I held it out to him. He took it, his hands shaking, tearing it open with frantic movements. He pulled out the contents. A single Greyhound bus ticket and a printout from a website. He stared at them, confusion wrinkling his forehead. "What is this?" he asked, looking up at me. "A ticket to Williston, North Dakota. And a job application." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "I am not giving you money, Darnell," I said, my voice low and hard. "Not a dime. Because if I give you money, you will just give it to Sal. And then you will need more for Vinny. And then more for the lawyer. You are a black hole son. And I am done feeding the void." "But they will kill me," he shrieked, throwing the ticket on the floor. "Sal does not want a bus ticket. He wants cash." "Sal wants his money," I corrected him. "But Sal is a businessman. He knows he cannot get blood from a stone. If you stay here in Chicago trying to hustle, trying to scam, trying to be the big shot you think you are, he will find you. And he will hurt you, not because of the money, but because you disrespected him." I pointed at the ticket on the floor. "That bus leaves in 2 hours. It goes to the oil fields. North Dakota. It is cold, it is hard, and it is in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knows you there, Darnell. Sal does not have reach in the fracking camps. You go there, you disappear. Darnell looked at the ticket with horror. The oil fields, he whispered. Manual labor. Dad, I have a degree. I am a businessman. I cannot dig ditches. You are not a businessman, I snapped, my patience finally snapping. You are a thief. You are a fraud. And right now you are a dead man walking. You have a degree in spending other people's money. Well, the bank is closed. I stood up, towering over him. I looked at the job listing. It was for a general laborer. Hard work, dangerous work. The kind of work that breaks your back but cleans your soul. I called the foreman, I said. He is an old friend of mine from the construction days. He knows you are coming. He knows you are in trouble. He won't ask questions. He will give you a bunk, a hard hat, and a paycheck. It won't be much, but it will be yours. Darnell scrambled to his feet, backing away as if the job application were toxic. No, he said, shaking his head. No way. I am not going to some frozen wasteland to shovel dirt. I will find another way. I will find investors. I will fix this. I laughed, a bitter sound. Investors? You mean victims? You mean you will find someone else to lie to? Someone else to rob? I walked over to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lake. I taught you how to stand, Darnell, I said without turning around. I taught you how to be a man, how to work, how to build. But you chose to kneel. You chose the easy way. You chose to beg. I turned back to him. Well, begging time is over. You have two choices. You pick up that ticket you get on that bus and you go learn what it feels like to earn $1 with your own sweat. You survive. Or you walk out that door into the waiting arms of Sal and his crew, and you deal with the consequences of the life you chose. It is up to you. Darnell looked at the door. He looked at the ticket on the floor. He looked at me. For a moment I saw the old arrogance flare up in his eyes, the entitlement, the belief that he was too good for hard work. But then he touched the bruise on his cheek. He remembered the pain, he remembered the fear, he realized that his suit was ruined, his wife was in jail, and his father was a stone wall. Slowly, painfully, he bent down. He picked up the ticket. He picked up the job information. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. The shame was finally real. Do I ever come back? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. That depends on who comes back, I said. If Darnell the con artist comes back, the door is locked. If Darnell the man comes back, maybe we can have coffee. He nodded. He put the envelope in his pocket. He walked to the elevator. His limp pronounced, his head bowed. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He hit the button. The doors opened. He stepped inside. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say I love you. He just stood there staring at the floor as the doors slid shut, erasing him from my view. I stood in the silence of the penthouse. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. It is a terrible thing to send your child into the wilderness, to know that he will be cold, that he will be tired, that he will be alone. But it is the only way to save him. I had spent my life building structures, protecting assets, designing vaults, but I had failed to build the most important foundation of all, character. Now Darnell would have to build it himself, starting from the bottom of a frozen ditch in North Dakota. I walked over to the sidebar and poured myself a drink. My hand trembled as I lifted the glass. To hard work, I whispered, to the empty room, and to the long road home. I drank the scotch. It burned going down. Good. I needed to feel something other than the ghost of the son I used to know. I sat down and pulled out my phone. I had one more call to make. The job wasn't finished. Becky was still in the wind, or rather in a holding cell, plotting her next move. And I had a feeling she wouldn't go quietly. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, I just needed to watch the sun go down and hope that somewhere on a Greyhound bus my son was watching it too and finally starting to understand the value of a sunrise you earned. I closed my eyes. Protocol Omega was almost complete. Just a few more loose ends to tie. And then maybe, just maybe, I could finally retire. But first I had to sell a patent and buy a new life, one without termites in the foundation. I sat at the head of a conference table made of reclaimed teak and brushed steel, looking at a manila folder lying in the center of the surface. It was tattered at the edges. There was a faint smudge of dirt on the cover, shaped distinctly like the heel of a designer boot. It was the same folder Becky had thrown at my face in the basement 3 days ago. It was the same folder she had screamed was worthless paper trash just before she stormed out to commit a felony. Opposite me sat Julian Thorne, the CEO of Ironclad Security Systems, a man who had been my fiercest competitor back in the 90s and was now the titan of the industry. He looked at the folder, then he looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and reverence. "You mean to tell me," Thorne said, his voice hushed, "that this has been sitting in a filing cabinet in your basement for 15 years? I nodded, taking a sip of the sparkling water his assistant had poured for me. "Under a pile of tax returns and old blueprints," I said. "My son called it junk." His wife threw it on the floor and stepped on it. Thorne reached out and touched the folder gently as if it were a religious artifact. He opened it, revealing the schematics and the dense lines of code I had written by hand before cloud computing was even a concept. It was the master key for the Blackwood Protocol, a polymorphic encryption algorithm designed to secure physical and digital vaults simultaneously. It was the unhackable lock, the holy grail of banking security. I had never patented it publicly because I didn't trust the market back then, but I had notarized the original discovery dates and kept the only hard copy safe. Thorne scanned the pages, his fingers tracing the logic gates I had drawn. "This is brilliant," he whispered. "It is elegant. We have spent millions trying to replicate the stability of your old systems. Cyrus, and here it is, the missing link." He looked up at me. "Why now? Why sell it after all these years?" I looked out the window at the skyline. "Because I am tired of guarding the gate," I said. "And because I recently learned that if you hold on to something too tightly, people will try to cut off your hand to take it. I would rather sell it to a man who knows what it is than let it rot in a storage unit or be burned by fools who think it is kindling." Thorne nodded, understanding the subtext of betrayal in my voice. He closed the folder. "We want it, Cyrus. We want the patent, the rights, the source code, everything. We will integrate it into our global defense grid. Your name will be on every secure server from London to Tokyo. I do not care about the fame," I said. "I care about the number." Thorne pulled a checkbook out of his jacket pocket. Marcus Vance, my lawyer who was sitting silently in the corner, leaned forward. "The offer was 5, Marcus said. 5 million. Lump sum. No royalties, no earnouts. Clean break." Thorne didn't blink. He didn't haggle. He knew he was buying a legacy for pennies on the dollar relative to its long-term value. 5 million, he agreed. He wrote the check. His pen scratched against the paper, a sound that was infinitely more satisfying than the scratch of Darnell's pen on the fraudulent deed. He tore the check out and slid it across the table. I picked it up. $5 million. It was a small slip of paper, blue and security watermarked. It weighed less than a gram, and yet it was heavier than the entire house Darnell had tried to sell. I looked at the check, and then I looked at the dirty footprint on the folder. The irony hit me so hard I almost laughed out loud. Darnell and Becky had been standing in that basement surrounded by concrete walls, screaming for money. They had torn the room apart, looking for cash, looking for gold, looking for anything shiny. They had held this folder in their hands. Becky had actually held it. She had $5 million in her palm, and she threw it at my head because it looked like work. She threw away a fortune because she was too ignorant to read and too arrogant to ask. They were so obsessed with the idea of easy money, of stealing a house worth $2 million, that they literally walked over a treasure worth more than double that. It was the ultimate testament to their character. They saw value only in what they could consume, what they could show off. They didn't understand that real wealth isn't a thing you find, it is a thing you create. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. "Thank you, Julian," I said, standing up. "Treat it well. It is my life's work." Thorne stood up and shook my hand. "It is in good hands, Cyrus. Are you sure you won't come on as a consultant? We could use your mind." I shook my head. "I am retired," I said, "officially. I have some fishing to do, and I have a new apartment to furnish." We walked out of the conference room, Marcus flanking me like a bodyguard. We took the elevator down to the lobby. As we walked to the car, Marcus looked at me, a grin spreading across his face. "You know, Cy," he said, "if Becky knew what she threw away, she would hang herself in her cell." "Let us hope she never finds out," I said, my voice flat. "Or let us hope she does. Maybe it will teach her to read before she throws things." We got into the car and I pulled the check out again. $5 million. Combined with my existing savings and the liquidation of the other assets, I was worth close to $8 million. I was a wealthy man. But as I looked at the city passing by, I didn't feel rich. I felt vindicated, yes, but I also felt a hollow space where my family used to be. Money can buy a lot of things. It can buy a penthouse, it can buy a Bentley, it can buy the best lawyers in the city. But it cannot buy a son who has a conscience. It cannot buy back the 40 years I spent raising a boy who turned into a monster. That was the real cost. Darnell had sold his soul for a debt he couldn't pay. I had sold my work for a fortune I could actually enjoy. But we both lost something that day. He lost his freedom. And I lost the last shred of hope that I wasn't alone in this world. Marcus dropped me off at the bank. I walked in bypassing the ATM that had eaten my card days ago. I walked straight to the manager's office, the same Peterson who had looked at me with pity and condescension. He looked up as I entered, his eyes widening when he saw Marcus standing behind me. Mr. Blackwood, Peterson stammered, standing up. I heard about the situation with your son. I am so sorry. We have unlocked your accounts, of course. I ignored his apology. I pulled the check from my pocket and placed it on his desk. Deposit this, I said. Peterson looked at the check. His eyes bugged out. $5 million. Ironclad security systems. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing. Mr. Blackwood, he gasped. This is a significant deposit. We have investment options, high-yield savings. Just put it in the checking account, Peterson. I cut him off. And order me a new debit card, one that works. And Peterson, yes, sir. If anyone named Blackwood comes in here claiming to be my relative, claiming to have power of attorney, claiming to be the Pope, you call the police first and me second. Do you understand? Crystal clear, Mr. Blackwood, Peterson said, sweating. Crystal clear. I walked out of the bank feeling the weight of the check lifted from my pocket, but the weight of the truth settling in my heart. I stood on the corner waiting for Marcus to pull the car around. I thought about the folder one last time. It was just paper, just lines and numbers, but it was proof that value is often hidden in plain sight, disguised as hard work and intellect. Darnell and Becky had been blinded by the flash. They wanted the diamond, but they threw away the carbon. They wanted the fruit, but they cut down the tree. And now they were rotting in a cell, hungry and cold, while the man they called worthless was standing in the sun holding the harvest. I got into the car. Take me home, Marcus, I said. To the new home. The one with the view. And the one without a basement. I was done with basements. I was done with hiding. It was time to live in the light. The view from the 45th floor was different than the view from Oak Street. Instead of looking at a cracked sidewalk and overgrown hedges, I was looking at the endless steel-gray expanse of Lake Michigan. The water was choppy whitecaps dancing in the wind, but up here behind triple-paned glass, the world was silent. I took a sip of coffee. It was good coffee brewed from beans I ground myself in a kitchen that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. But the best part of the morning wasn't the view or the coffee. It was the heavy, warm weight resting on my feet. Barnaby let out a long, contented sigh and shifted his weight. He was a 90-pound Rottweiler mix, a rescue dog I had picked up from the shelter 3 weeks ago. He had scars on his flank from a life of abuse, and he walked with a limp just like me. When I saw him in the cage looking at me with eyes that said he expected nothing but pain, I knew we were kindred spirits. We were both survivors. We were both discarded by people who should have cared for us. And now we were both living in a penthouse, eating steak and sleeping in peace. I scratched Barnaby behind the ears, and he leaned into my hand. It was the most honest affection I had received in 10 years. He didn't want my money. He didn't want my house. He just wanted to be safe. I looked at the calendar on the wall. It had been exactly 30 days since I walked out of that title company office. Yesterday I drove past the old lot on Oak Street. The house was gone. The demolition crew hadn't wasted any time. My fortress, my sanctuary, the place where I raised a son and buried a wife was just a flat expanse of churned mud and tire tracks. I thought I would cry when I saw it. I thought I would feel a sense of loss, but I just felt relief. The rot was gone. The memories of Darnell trying to break down the basement door. The memories of Becky screaming in the kitchen. They were buried under the dirt. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Barnaby lifted his head and let out a low, warning growl, but he didn't bark. He knew the rhythm of the knock. It was Marcus. I walked to the door, my cane tapping on the marble floor. I opened it, and Marcus Vance stood there looking sharp in a navy suit holding a bottle of aged scotch in a wooden box. "Ready for your beating, old man?" Marcus asked, stepping inside. I laughed. "You haven't beaten me since 1998, Marcus, and you were cheating then." We walked into the living room. Marcus set up the chessboard on the low table by the window while I poured the drinks. It was our weekly ritual: chess, scotch, and silence. But today the silence was heavy with unspoken updates. We played the first few moves quickly, pawns advancing, knights taking positions. Then Marcus leaned back and took a sip of his drink. "I heard from the district attorney today," he said, casually moving his bishop. And I asked, keeping my eyes on the board. "Becky took a plea deal." I paused, my hand hovering over my rook. "She pleaded guilty." "She didn't have a choice," Marcus said. The video from the basement was damning. Attempted murder is a hard charge to shake when you are recorded crushing pills into a cup. But she traded down. She gave them everything on the document forger Paul Hayes, and she testified about Darnell's involvement in the wire fraud. She got 10 years. 10 years, I repeated. She will be 40 when she gets out. 40 and broke, Marcus added. And single. She filed for divorce yesterday, cited irreconcilable differences and abandonment. She is blaming Darnell for everything, saying he masterminded the whole thing and she was just a dutiful wife following orders. I moved my rook, taking his bishop. She never learned, did she? She never learned to take responsibility. No, Marcus said, capturing my pawn, and she never will. She is sending letters from prison, Sai. To you, to Sterling, even to me. Begging for money for the canteen, begging for a better lawyer. I had my secretary mark them, return to sender. Good, I said. Let her write to the walls. We played in silence for a few minutes. The only sound was the clinking of ice in our glasses and Barnaby's soft snoring. But the question was hanging in the air, the question I hadn't asked but needed to know. And him I asked finally. And my son. Marcus sighed. He stopped looking at the board and looked at me. His eyes were kind, but he didn't sugarcoat it. He is alive, Sai. That is the best I can say. Where is he? Williston, Marcus said. North Dakota. He actually got on the bus. I was surprised. I thought he would run, but he was too scared of Sal. He took the job you set up. He is working as a mud logger on a fracking site. 12-hour shifts. Sub-zero temperatures. He lives in a container housing unit with 3 other guys. Is he safe? I asked the father in me, betraying the architect for a split second. Safe from Sal. Marcus shrugged. For now. Sal does not have a reach that far north. But Darnell is looking over his shoulder every second of every day. I have a contact up there who keeps an eye on things. He says Darnell looks haunted. He has lost 30 pounds. He doesn't talk to anyone. He just works, eats, and sleeps. He is terrified, Sai. He thinks every car that drives by is a hitman. I nodded, staring at the Black King on the board. Good. Fear is a teacher. It is the only teacher he ever listened to. Does he know about the money? Marcus asked. Does he know you sold the patents? No, I said. And he never will. If he knew I had $8 million sitting in the bank, he would find a way to come back. He would crawl on his hands and knees through the snow to beg. And if I let him back in, I would be killing him. Marcus tilted his head. How do you figure? Because if I bail him out again, he learns nothing. I said, my voice hardening. He goes back to gambling. He goes back to the scams. And eventually he crosses someone who doesn't just break legs. The only way Darnell survives is if he becomes a man who can survive on his own. The oil fields will either make him or break him, but at least it will be his own doing. Marcus nodded slowly. You are a hard man, Cyrus Blackwood. I had to be, I whispered. I built a fortress to keep the world out, Marcus. But I forgot to watch the gates. I let the enemy walk right in because he had my last name. I won't make that mistake again. Checkmate, I said, moving my queen. Marcus looked down at the board. He smiled, shaking his head. You trapped me. I didn't see that coming. You were too busy watching the knight, I said. You forgot about the queen. Distraction is the oldest trick in the book. Marcus laughed and poured us another drink. We sat there watching the sun set over the lake, turning the water into a sheet of hammered gold. I felt a profound sense of peace settling over me. It wasn't the happy ending I had dreamed of 40 years ago when I held Darnell in my arms for the first time. I didn't have a loving family around me. I didn't have grandchildren playing on the rug. But I had safety, I had respect, and I had the truth. The phone on the table buzzed. It was an alert from my security system. Not for the penthouse, but for the storage unit where I kept the rest of my archives. I picked it up and checked the camera feed. It was nothing. just a shadow passing by the motion sensor, probably a stray cat. But I watched it for a minute just to be sure. Old habits die hard. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "I am fine," I said, putting the phone down. "Just checking the perimeter." Marcus stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I should get going. I have a dinner meeting with Sterling. He wants to know if you are interested in consulting on that new skyscraper downtown. The structural integrity issues are giving him a headache." "Tell him I am retired," I said. "Tell him I am busy walking my dog and spending my royalties." Marcus grinned. "I will tell him you are expensive. He will pay. He knows you are the only one who can fix it." "Maybe," I said. "We will see." Marcus walked to the door. He stopped and looked back. "You know, you did the right thing. With the house, with the trust, with Darnell. It doesn't feel good, but it was right." "I know," I said. "Lucille would have been proud. She would have been heartbroken," Marcus said softly. "But she would have been proud that you survived." He left, closing the heavy door behind him. I was alone again. Just me and Titan. I walked over to the window. The city lights were coming on, a grid of electricity and ambition stretching out to the horizon. I thought about Darnell shivering in a bunk in North Dakota. I wondered if he was looking at the stars. I wondered if he hated me. Probably. But hate was better than indifference. Hate meant he felt something. Hate meant he was alive. I had cut off the limb to save the body. It was the hardest amputation of my life, but the patient was still breathing. "Come on, Titan," I said to the dog. "Time for a walk." He jumped up, his tail wagging, his nails clicking on the marble. We walked out onto the terrace. I breathed in the cold air. I was 72 years old. I was alone, but I was standing. I was the architect, and I had just redesigned my life from the ground up. The foundation was solid, the walls were strong. And for the first time in a long time, the door was locked, and I was the only one with the key. I looked at the city one last time before turning back inside. Let them try to break in now, I thought. I am ready. The wind off Lake Michigan has a bite to it even in the spring, a sharp cold that cuts through wool and silk alike, but standing on the balcony of my new life. 40 stories above the pavement, I did not feel the chill. I felt only the heat of the city rising up to meet me. I looked out at the grid of Chicago, the glowing veins of traffic, the towering skeletons of steel and glass. I knew this city better than I knew the back of my own hand because I had helped draw the lines that defined it. I could point to the Federal Reserve Building 3 miles south and tell you exactly how thick the concrete is in the sub-basement. I could look at the skyline and see the skeleton of the city, the load-bearing walls, the stress points, the hidden reinforcements that keep the whole thing from collapsing under its own weight. It is a beautiful thing, a well-built structure. It is honest. It does not lie about its strength. If a beam is weak, it breaks. If a foundation is cracked, the house falls. Gravity is the ultimate judge, and it does not take bribes, it does not accept excuses, and it certainly does not care about your last name. My family was a poorly built house. I see that now with the clarity of distance. For years, I tried to shore up the sagging beams. I tried to patch the cracks in the drywall with money and patience. I tried to reinforce the foundation with love and forgiveness. But you cannot fix a structure that is rotten at the core. Darnell was the rot. It is a hard thing for a father to admit a truth that tastes like bile in the throat, but it is the truth nonetheless. He was a structural failure waiting to happen. He was built on sand. Greed, entitlement, laziness. These are the termites of the soul, and they had eaten him hollow long before he picked up that crowbar. I took a sip of the vintage wine Marcus had left, a heavy red blend that tasted of earth and history. It was expensive wine, the kind Becky would have bought just to post a picture of the label on social media without ever tasting the craftsmanship inside. I drank it slowly, savoring the complexity. I thought about Darnell shivering in that container unit in North Dakota. I wondered if he was sleeping. I wondered if he was hungry. A part of me, the old part, the father who bandaged scraped knees, wanted to pick up the phone. I wanted to send a wire transfer. I wanted to send a warm coat. I wanted to be the safety net one last time. But then I looked at my hand, the hand that had signed the deed, the hand that had held the cane while they mocked me, and I remembered the look in his eyes when he thought I was dead to him. It wasn't grief. It was calculation. He was counting my money before my body was even cold. If I saved him now, I would be killing him later. I would be robbing him of the only chance he had to become a real man. Pain is the only teacher that Darnell respects. So let him learn. Let the cold wind of the Dakotas teach him the value of $1. Let the ache in his back teach him the weight of labor. Let the silence of the prairie teach him the cost of betrayal. I was not abandoning him. I was setting him free from the prison of his own entitlement. Titan nudged my leg, his wet nose cold against my hand. I looked down at the dog. He had scars too. He had been beaten, starved, and locked away. But he didn't have hate in his heart. He had gratitude. He wagged his tail, happy just to be standing next to me, happy just to breathe the air. Animals understand something that Darnell and Becky never did. They understand that loyalty is a two-way street. They understand that you do not bite the hand that feeds you unless you want to starve. I scratched Titan behind the ears. "You are a good boy," I whispered. "You are better company than a son who steals." I turned my back on the view and walked into the living room. The penthouse was quiet, vast, and impeccably designed. It didn't have the memories of the old house. It didn't have the ghost of Lucille in the kitchen or the height marks of Darnell on the doorframe. It was a clean slate. Some people my age are terrified of clean slates. They cling to the past like barnacles to a sinking ship, afraid to let go because they think their history is the only thing keeping them afloat. But I am an engineer. I know that sometimes the only way to save a project is to bulldoze the site and start over. Demolition is not an act of violence. It is an act of creation. You have to clear the rubble to pour the new foundation. And that is what I had done. I had demolished the lie of my family life. I had bulldozed the expectations, the guilt, the toxic obligation. And now I was standing on the cleared ground ready to build something new. I wasn't lonely. That was the surprise. I expected to feel a crushing loneliness, a void where my family used to be. But instead I felt light. I felt unburdened. It was the feeling of taking off a pair of shoes that had been too tight for 20 years. I walked over to the desk where the check from Ironclad Security sat. $5 million, plus the recovered assets. I was wealthy beyond measure. But the money wasn't the victory. The victory was the agency. The victory was knowing that I was still the captain of my own ship. I wasn't a senile old man. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a burden. I was Cyrus Blackwood. I was the architect, and I was still in the game. I thought about Becky sitting in her cell, blaming everyone but herself. I thought about the divorce papers she was filing, the bridges she was burning. She was a tragedy of her own, making a woman who chased the reflection of gold and drowned in the river. She never understood that wealth isn't what you have, it is what you can do. She wanted to be rich. I just wanted to be free. And tonight, I was the richest man in Chicago because I owed nothing to anyone. My debts were paid. My conscience was clear. I raised my glass to the empty room. To Lucille, I said, my voice steady. "You were right, my love. You told me to build the back door. You told me to prepare for the storm. I didn't want to listen, but I am glad I did. You saved me, Lucille. Even from the grave you saved me." I took a drink, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, and to me I added, "To the old dog who still knows a few new tricks, to the man who refused to go quietly into the night, to the architect who finally designed a life just for himself." I finished the wine and set the glass down on the marble coaster. The clock on the wall ticked a steady, rhythmic sound. Time. That was the real currency. I had maybe 10 years left, maybe 15 if I was lucky. Darnell and Becky had tried to steal those years. They tried to turn my twilight into a nightmare. But I had taken them back. Every minute from this point forward was mine. I wasn't going to spend them waiting for a visit that would never come. I wasn't going to spend them apologizing for being alive. I was going to spend them consulting on skyscrapers. I was going to spend them fishing on the lake. I was going to spend them walking my dog and eating steak and reading books in peace. I walked over to the chessboard where the game with Marcus was still paused. The white queen, my piece, was positioned to strike. The black king was cornered. Checkmate in one move. I smiled. Life is like chess. You have to see the whole board. You have to be willing to sacrifice a pawn to save the king. Darnell was a pawn who thought he was a player. He moved without thinking. He attacked without a strategy. And he lost. I tipped the black king over with my finger. It fell with a soft clatter against the wood. Game over. I picked up my cane and walked to the bedroom. Titan followed his nails, clicking a happy rhythm. Tomorrow I had a meeting with the developers of the new trade center. They wanted to know if I could design a vault that could withstand an electromagnetic pulse. I already had a few ideas sketched out on a napkin. My mind was buzzing with angles and stress loads and alloy compositions. I wasn't done. I wasn't fading away. I was just starting the second act. I turned off the lights in the living room, leaving the city glow to watch over my new domain. The darkness wasn't scary. It was peaceful. It was the silence after the storm. I climbed into the bed, the sheets cool and crisp. I didn't check the locks on the front door. I didn't need to. I designed the system myself. Nobody was getting in unless I invited them. And for the first time in a long time, I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the sleep of a man who has fought his war, won his peace, and has absolutely nothing left to fear. The basement was empty. The past was buried, and the future was wide open. Greed is a blinder that makes you see value only in what glitters, causing you to miss the diamond hidden in the rough. My son and his wife spent years trying to break into my vault, never realizing that the real treasure wasn't the gold inside, but the wisdom of the man holding the key. They wanted my legacy without learning my lessons. In the end, they inherited exactly what they earned, the weight of their own hollowness. You cannot inherit dignity, you have to build it brick by brick. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have given your son a second chance, or did Darnell get exactly what he deserved? Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and revenge. See you in the next one.